Whoa, high fives all around. Welcome to Killer POV episode 56. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G from FEARNET and Icons of Fright.
Hi, Rob.
I'm still going to say it. I don't care.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Because it's true. To my left is Elric Kane, Inside Horror.
Yeah.
Jump cut.
I'm still going to say that
deliveries.
too, and I'll say jump cut for at least a few more weeks.
Oh, come on.
I'm formerly of a lot of places too.
Right.
So.
All right. Rebekah
not
McKendry from FANGORIA.
And FEARNET. I'm
And
saying
FEARNET.
it too.
Right on.
I taught at Hunter College.
That's
I
right.
Taught
And
I taught at VCU. I worked at Stride Right in high school. I'm
Welcome
going
to the
way
LinkedIn
back.
show, where we make professional connections.
Yeah, the opening of the show is now going to be our resume.
Because we all need jobs. And speaking of people in the same position
As us, our special guest, Lawrence Raffel from FEARNET.
I will be the first to say formerly of FEARNET.
Whoa, there it is.
Did you work
Oh,
at
man.
Stride Right too?
what's his position?
No, but
We should
I did have a
announce for
girlfriend
people who don't know
in
us.
college that worked at Stride Right.
It was the worst job I've ever had. Ever. I mean, like, I would rather work at McDonald's
At
than Stride
where?
Right. Stride Right.
What the hell's a Stride Right?
They sell
Kids'
baby shoes.
store.
Kids' shoes? Oh, God.
It was my first job ever. It was a horror movie in itself.
All right, I'm the only person in the room without a kid. I don't want to talk about it.
How do you not know what Stride Right
Whatever.
is? Non-breeder.
I didn't know that was a thing.
That's like
Non-breeders?
I consider that a
That's a
massive
movie title,
compliment.
non-breeders.
I would rather be a non-breeder. Yeah, what was your title officially? I mean, Lawrence was the boss to me, essentially.
I mean, basically editor in chief, and I basically oversaw the website. So everything that went on the website ran through me, whether it was the tech side, the editorial, video production.
He was the man.
And
behind
some
the
of
web,
you
the
might
man with
know
the plan.
him. The way I knew of him wasn't really through that, but for you did Shockwaves with Ryan.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Those
The
podcasts. And I always
podcast.
listen to those. Those were good.
They were great.
They're always really
Thank you.
informative, and it's a shame Ryan's dropped so low.
Oh,
I get on
Love
a
you,
plane.
Jason.
I expected great things from him.
I did, but I guess you once
I'm
you're
on a
not
plane
together.
with him at
Oh, that's
6
right, you are.
a.m. heading towards Estes Park, Colorado for the Stanley Film Festival. So I will see you at 6 a.m., Ryan. Actually, by the time this airs, we will already be there.
yeah. Already
Yes.
there, getting your trivia questions together.
Hell yeah.
And just, I want to give a little history for Lawrence from before FEARNET, because he was with FEARNET from the very, very beginning. But he's also from the East Coast, from Philly originally, and he started his own website called Monsters at Play, which was interesting because it was a review site in the early days when Anchor Bay was first acquiring a lot of these Argento and Fulci movies and putting them out for the first time. So, as I'm sure listeners here, that was a really exciting time for me. I mean, I got all those Argento titles on VHS clamshell boxes when Anchor Bay was first putting them out. But it was just exciting because, we'd read about a lot of these titles, and it was the first time we were getting legitimate, well-restored versions of them. And Lawrence was there at the very beginning reviewing almost all of them as they were coming out. And that's part of the reason why our topic later is going to be Italian horror, because that was a good chunk of the stuff that was in the early days of Monsters at Play.
Yeah, it was a real boom for those types of movies. I mean, up until then, it was either bootlegs or, like you were saying, when they first started with the clamshells. But before then, it was really just kind of like trading bootlegs with people and, making copies of import laser discs or, VHS tapes from like Japan. And actually, Cinema Wasteland is a horror convention in Ohio. And way back in the day, they used to have a site called, it wasn't a site, it was actually a newsletter called Video Wasteland. And it was like the original Netflix, basically. You would get a catalog from Ken, and you would go through the catalog and call them, and you'd say, I want, Cannibal, Holocaust, Tenebre, and Suspiria. And you get a box about a week later with the 3 movies in it. You dub them, you send them back, you repeat, do the thing all over again. So, I mean, these movies were not available. They were really hard to come by. So it really was a golden age for those types of movies.
And what was like your? I've never actually talked to you about kind of the motivation behind Monsters at Play, but I mean, like, did you have like a writing background? Did you like reviewing movies in general, or were you just excited to talk about these titles somehow?
Well, I mean, I went to college for film. Back then it was called radio, television, and film. The first of many times I'm going to date myself or age myself.
It's actually still
them
University of
are.
Austin still has that
Do they
title.
still do that? I know Temple doesn't do it anymore, and that's where I went. 4 years of college, thinking I wanted to be a filmmaker, realized that I didn't want to be a filmmaker. Always liked the writing courses, the theory courses. That was the stuff that really got me excited. I just liked watching movies. And I had a job out of college where I was basically just like coding medical websites. And I worked with some people who we just talked about building a site to review horror movies. I don't remember where it originated from. I guess, there weren't a lot of review sites back then. And a few that were out there. I mean, there are a few that are still around, Mondo Digital and DVD Maniacs and Eccentric Cinema. They're all great sites. But there weren't a lot of them. And I just guess I wanted to lend another voice. And it was the right place at the right time. I had people that were willing to help me build it and design it. And we did it during business hours. We were getting paid to build these medical websites and built Monsters of Play in less than a day, and started to reach out to the different distributors to see if I can get review copies. And, over time, people started writing me and, saying, hey, I really like your site. I want to write for it. And before I knew it, I had 7, 8 people writing for the site, and nobody was getting paid. They were just getting review copies. And a lot of them I brought to FEARNET. Gregory Burkhart came from Monsters of Play. Cara Lyon came from Monsters of Play. And, I was able to give a little back and get them paying gigs when I got the FEARNET gig, which felt good to be able to give a little bit back to those guys. But it really was just born out of, just wanting to talk about horror movies and share. It's horror. People who like horror movies, it's a community, and it's all about talking about recommendations and sharing. And for us, it was an outlet to really be able to talk about horror movies. Yeah. And it was a great time to talk about them because people didn't know about a lot of these movies. Yeah. They didn't really know about the Fulcis and the Argentos and, Jean Rollin and Mario Bava and like all these directors. They just weren't really as known back then as they are today.
And it's interesting how it's more exciting when the information was less accessible.
Oh, yeah.
As a we've had that one episode where we talk about discoveries, and I still get that feeling if I discover something, but not so much before other people, but just on my own. I don't think it's about being ahead of people. It's more about just, hey, what is this? And then you look up and then you somehow find it and import. Compared to now where information's at your disposal 24/7 and every site, for the most part, is kind of printing the same stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, actually, before we prepping to do this show. I mean, I think, anyone that's listening obviously already has a fairly vast knowledge of the horror genre, but I think what people like about our show is that we're always throwing titles out that there might be one or two that they're like, you know what, I never heard of that one. But like right before I came here, I just did a Google search for like, best Italian horror. And every single one, all the way dating up to, to this year, it was like, here's 10 movies you've never heard of. The Beyond.
Yeah, I
Zombi.
noticed that too.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's now we're at the, maybe when, you started Monsters of Play, that was like, oh my God, I didn't know about that House by the Cemetery or whatever.
Right.
But now it's like even people still claiming these are, I guess to the general public, or maybe if there's like a 12-year-old kid now that's discovering these movies for the first time, it's still new to them. But I feel like if you're listening to us, these are not obscure titles anymore.
I have some deep cuts that I'll go to.
Okay, good.
But yeah, I discovered the same thing where I would like look up Italian horror and it was like, here's Suspiria and Cannibal Holocaust. And those were always like the first two.
The passage of time also, I think, has an effect on this because when Anchor Bay started to release these titles, they hadn't been released before. So Anchor Bay released them. Then there was a drought and most of the companies folded or went to more mainstream independent stuff. And, then Blu-rays came around and a lot of companies started to re-release them again. So I feel like during those droughts, like it took from like Anchor Bay releasing them on a DVD, like the Bavas, to like, I guess it was like Kino who released them on Blu-ray. Yeah. And it's like 10 years later. And so it's like you've got this 10-year gap where if you weren't around when they were coming out on DVD and, you're kind of just sort of discovering them on Blu-ray, I feel like the passage of time has a lot to do with that.
And isn't it weird how like new titles coming out like on Blu-ray, like titles that we already know and love and have seen a million times, if we hear that like some new Blu-ray company is doing it, we get excited all over again.
Oh my God. I just bought Ms. 45. Well, I didn't buy it. Okay. I got it in the mail as a screener, but I was so excited because I got the Ms. 45 Blu-ray from Alamo Drafthouse. And actually, I'm sorry, that one I did not get as a screener. Thank you, Jim Kuntz. He gave it to me.
Okay.
He just got fired for that. Sorry, Jim.
No, because I'm talking about it now and I'm giving it plenty of press and I talked about it on Fango. So that's why they do that. But, and I mean, it's one of my favorite films ever. I could probably recite it if the girl actually talked in it.
If there was dialogue.
If there was dialogue, I'd recite it. But I love that film. But because it came on Blu-ray, I had to rewatch it over again. That was last night. And it looks
it's
beautiful.
interesting though about that on both what you're talking about is I think for a lot of those films, actually, for me, I skipped the whole seeing it on DVD at all. It went from VHS to fucking Blu-ray.
Oh,
you know, a lot of them. I think a lot of them will be like, oh, I saw that when I was 12, 13, loved it, and then you see it on Blu-ray suddenly like, oh my God, it's such a different movie.
Never seen it before,
and if you skip the DVD generation for any reason, maybe some of these titles were hardly out on DVD anyway, or were out briefly and
was
disappeared.
DVD like like a little bit behind in New
DVD
Zealand?
happened.
No, it would have been like late 90s, I think was the DVD. The big DVD
it took a while for it to catch on, I'll tell you that much. It was
I will
slow on the
say-
shelves.
My first year of college was 97. And that first year I was so excited because I wanted to get a Columbia House membership by myself. And this is one of those things where like you get the book of stamps and you get to like pick out 9. And you could either do VHS tapes, which would be a penny a piece, or you could do the DVDs, which were going to be like $3 a piece. And this was when the DVDs were still like $20 a piece.
I did the
if you
laser
buy them
discs for
full.
Columbia House.
Are
my
you kidding?
God.
Yeah.
I
You
did
find
the
Leatherface
VHS and I got all
We're
those
still looking for the
VHSs.
Leatherface one for
Dave
David.
Scow's on the hunt for Leatherface and the Crow and Laserdisc.
Oh, geez, I don't know. I mean,
I just went into a store yesterday and was looking because of him.
yeah.
I was in San Francisco. I was like, I might as well look. I don't have a laser. I'm going to look for him just in case.
But I know I did have Ms. 45 on DVD, but I got it from Kim's when they were still at their old location in New York City, and it was out of print then, and I paid like $45 for it, and that was probably 10 years ago. So
Did you see yesterday they're losing their location?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can't, and that's
crazy.
not
The last
even their.
That was a good
that's their
little
new
original.
location.
Yeah, that was the newest one. It's
bummer.
It's hard. I'll tell you what. The weirdest thing. I was driving home a couple days ago on Burbank Boulevard. You might have seen this, and there's a brand new video store. It blew my mind.
Where?
And it's not a mom and pop. It's just like it looks like a mom and pop version of a Blockbuster.
Yeah, I've been meaning
Video
to
Hut,
stop there. Yeah,
and it just popped up, and I was like, wait a minute.
You know
Video
what's
stores
funny?
don't pop up anymore.
it called?
I pass it every time I
think
come
it's Video
here
Hut.
to do this show.
Yeah,
and
it's
every
really
time
new.
I'm like,
Which means I
gotta
just
stop
drove
there.
past it.
Yeah, you'll
It's on
I need to
Burbank.
pop in
when you're
because I need
driving
to see what
home,
they do.
look to your right.
Okay.
After around like Winstead or whatever. It's,
Wow.
Yeah, there's a video store there. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, the
thing
ones
there?
that have been there for a long time have huge, the cinephiles, that's one thing. But for a brand new video store to pop up, you're like, whoa, there's something really ballsy, kind of exciting about it, whether it's insane.
Wow.
I want a
don't know.
membership and I
I need to go
one,
buy it.
but-
Dave's going to give me hell now because there was this one video store on Ventura, really close to Jump called Red Hot Video. I think it actually used to be a porn store.
I think it was a lot of gay porn.
Yeah, but they shut down,
I
and
think.
he was like, "You saw this for sale sign out front," and Dave got really excited. He's like, "Bekah, let's buy a video store." It's like this dream of his, and I was like, "That would be the worst business move ever right
would.
now."
No, see, my theory
That's
was
my
better,
dream,
right?
too.
But what I was telling
Yeah.
Rob is what you need for small businesses now, they can't be one thing anymore. Like the Alamo Drafthouse is the perfect example. It succeeds because it's multiple things at once. And you really can't. And so like if I had the money, I would have the walls of Jump Cut be like straight up. And then at night at 6 o'clock, when you close the cafe, the walls would come down and it'd be a freaking video store for the next 4 hours. And then at midnight, you'd bring out the beer and it would be a bar. I mean, I think that's the only way to keep places running. I think that it's so hard for little things, whatever they are. I've learned a lot just by doing the last couple of years where you go, oh, all these things I've loved and seen gone away, I get it now. And I used to just as a consumer just be like, oh, that sucks. Or, this place is ripping me off. And now I'm like, oh, on the other side. And it's good to learn because I do think there was a time in America where small businesses thrived. And I'd say now that is not the time,
Right.
Because no one's helping them.
But I do understand why Kim's is closing down because I would go there and they always had like rare import, like hard to find stuff. And so I would go there and I would find, The Night Evelyn Came from the Grave or something like that. And it would still be $20. And then I would be like, I should have that. And then I would go home and buy it used off Amazon. And so as much as I wanted to support them, I still couldn't because, you can go buy it used off Amazon or you can go stream it.
I bought that exact title from Kim's Underground in New York City. And they had the same marks. Yeah,
That's awesome.
For sure. I found they had, because it was one of the first places that I remember having like a nunsploitation section, like actual like exploitation sections. And I bought a lot of good stuff at Kim's.
Yeah, I
My
have a
last
lot from
purchase
them.
in where they are now was the Scanners box set, the UK one.
Oh,
So
But I just went on a huge segue because what I was going to say is that I'd seen Torso on VHS and always made a real impression in my brain, even though when you go back, obviously narratively, it's all over the place in some ways, but it really does have a mood to it. And then I started on Blu-ray and I was like, holy shit. Like this is one of those movies that shouldn't look that good. It's a great Blu-ray. I think it's Blue Underground or...
Yeah.
It's definitely one. It's a good
on our
title.
list.
I mean, yeah, exactly. We'll get to more of those, but that's a weird feeling. I think it's a good feeling going from your memories, because I think a lot of our memories are forged in VHS just because of when we saw these titles. So then when you then get to see it again, it really is like that's a real new experience. It's better than seeing a 35 millimeter print in a way.
The Visitor took on a whole new experience because
Visitor's
I'd seen that like back in the 80s on VHS and I even owned it. Like Elric, I
yeah.
remember Elric was shocked when he walked
resisted
into my
every
house
time.
the first time because he was like, you own Visitor? Who owns Visitor?
Well, no, my
And,
goal was to watch that film film, but in a
screen.
cinema.
On the big screen.
So for like 5 years, I was resisting borrowing someone's VHS going, no, I'm going to see it.
But it was
with
one
no
of
idea
these-
that Draft House were going to put it out.
I owned it from my childhood, and it's one that I just kept the entire time, but I thought it was horrible.
It was
and it
worth
wasn't
every
until
second
I
of
went
my
back
waiting.
and watched it on Blu-ray that I was like, well, it's horrible, but it's interesting. So
If only the Hawks had Lance Henriksen as their GM right now, they would fly through these playoffs. That guy's a hell of a GM, Lance. John Carpenter right now just guffawed listening to this episode, and
Right.
he's the only one who
Sure he is.
got the reference if he's listening.
All right, so why don't we go through what we've seen this week,
Yeah.
and then
Yes.
we can tackle our topic. Why don't you go ahead?
I can be
Elric.
quick. Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Firstly, you have to go see Under the Skin. I talked about it last week, but it's a better movie a week later than even when
Oh,
I
are you
started.
still
did you see
thinking
it
about it?
twice, or are you still
No,
thinking about
it's just
it?
really interesting because it's not one of those movies you watch and go, oh, that's a great movie in terms of just like a narrative movie, like what you tend to go to movie theaters for. It's not like it's, oh, that was so entertaining and fun. I feel filled up. It's just really fascinating.
I have to say, this one's been polarizing too. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, polarizing because you guys put it on the front cover, but that's a great, bold move. And actually, that's one of the best things I think Chris has ever done. I even wrote to him today saying, and I loved his first write up about it. He's saying he hopes history will defend that choice because I think it's one of the most beautiful covers they've ever done. But it's a film that's really haunting, and the longer I go away from it, the more alien it is, and it's about an alien encounter. And so, in a sense, I think it kind of it's like a perfect tone of what it is. And the soundtrack in my head, just everything about it. So I broke a cardinal rule. I've never read a book after seeing a movie my whole life. If I see a movie, I'm done. I don't want to ever read the book. The other way is fine. So I went straight away and I bought the book and I'm starting it now, because I can't imagine what it will be because the film is so minimal and it's just watching her expressions and reactions to things. The book's probably I assume going to be the interior. So
I've heard, well, I talked to Amma on Sunday and she'd seen it and she was not as into it as you are. But
she didn't like last year, The Hunt. I remember her saying it was the worst film of the year, and I thought it was
haven't seen that
basically the
one.
best film of the year, Mads Mikkelsen film.
But I do
Amma,
know
if you're
that the
listening,
book-
suck it.
she did our photography on Sunday. It was beautiful. But
Don't suck it so much.
I do know that the book is supposed to be more food oriented.
Oh.
Much more, because you never
yeah.
really know what they're doing with the
No.
humans in the movie, but the book is much more food oriented.
And yeah, Glazer doesn't strike me as the kind of director who would try to be faithful to a book anyway. I think he was obsessed by it for a few years. But there's things that I've been reading in the interviews post the film where I just can't even believe it. Like there's a scene with a guy whose face is heavily deformed. I don't know if it's elephantitis. Obviously something like that, a modern version. And 100%, I'm just watching the scene going, oh, wow, this is a really hard scene to watch, but that's incredible prosthetics. And then you read about the film afterwards, and it's like, nope, that's the guy. They just looked for a guy who looked like that and threw him in a scene with Scarlett Johansson. And afterwards, he's like, oh, my whole life's changed because Scarlett Johansson was so gentle and talked to me, and now I feel so much better about myself. And just like, it's kind of beautiful. The whole process of this movie, the more, watch it as soon as you can and then start reading about it. I think it's fascinating how they made this film. But it's good. It's great that it really stays with you, because I was worried after I watched it that maybe it would just seem like a veneer of something sparkly and nicely made. But I think it's a really interesting film, and we'll see what the book. I'll report back once I read it.
So what did you see this week?
Since
we talked about that last
a
week.
few weeks ago, I saw some other films I'd like to recap. Green
Sure.
Inferno by Eli Roth, worst film of the year. Okay, I'll move it. Proxy, actually, a film I'd wanted to see for a long time. Grant Moniger over at the and his brother David, who both helped run the Egyptian and Arrow for the last few years. Both said they saw it at Beyond Fest and it's the best horror film they've seen in like a decade. They were like, this is the best film in years or decade. It was a bold claim. It's not, but sorry, director Zach Parker. It's a really, really interesting film. I was up in San Francisco for the weekend and it was on demand, so I didn't have to pay for it. So I'm like, hell yeah, I'm at somebody else's house. Boom. It's fascinating because there aren't many films that in the first 10 minutes I don't feel like I've seen know the film, where you're going.
Right.
This film, at no point in the film do you know where it's going to end. It starts with something very disturbing for parents. It's a woman who seems very apathetic about. She goes to get her baby scan and she's like 8.5, 9 months pregnant, and she just has this expression on her face like, I don't really care. The woman's like, oh, it looks cute, and you can see it, and she's just like, whatever. And you're like, oh, this is weird. And then she just walks down the street and saying terrible happens, and then it bleeds off from this one terrible thing to making it very complicated and looking behind this event and all the different people who kind of get affected in their own way, almost like a crash type setup, but not a shitty movie that won an Oscar. It's really good. It's made in the Midwest. It's by a guy. It's his fourth feature, all super micro budget. This is obviously his biggest film.
Parker, I think.
Zach Parker. I think it's definitely one of the most. It'll definitely be on my top 10 by the end of the year. But it's one of the most interesting movies. I don't know if it's like a clear cut horror film. It has like two sequences that fit as a horror film. Otherwise, it's just kind of a fascinating indie. It suffers from one major dilemma. The only negative is that it's like, literally 30 minutes too long. It's like 120 minutes. And those films where you're like, if this was just a little tighter, because I love slow. I don't mind slow burn. It just had that feeling like that's the only thing I would have said.
Yeah.
Really interesting though. I think it has Joe Swanberg in one role. Alexia Rasmussen is the actress who starts on it, kind of changes characters. She was great. And I would have watched her in a whole other film. A really interesting movie. I think people, if they're interested, what I'd compare it to maybe is like if you liked Absentia or movies like that are a bit more about the ideas than the horror, it's probably in that wavelength.
Nice.
And the only other thing I'll say is I had to watch Frozen. I've been tweeting about this, but
is
no one
that
cares.
the Adam Green movie or the
Frozen,
musical?
The musical. I had to watch it about 7 times in the last week because we were away on the weekend, and Dash keeps watching it. And I can't believe I didn't see it the first time in the theaters. By the 6th time, I'm just sitting there going, oh, it's literally not, this isn't me putting some crazy theory on it. It's literally a Universal horror monster movie from the 20s. It's literally that. The exact beat structure, besides the show tunes, it's just this woman, she's been keeping this thing a dark secret. Suddenly she can make ice, and she gets like chased out of the castle, creates this crazy ice castle. She can't go back. Her sister has to bring her back. I'm just watching this movie going, oh my God, no wonder it's so popular. I think it's like totally tapping into what made those films popular with kids too. That classic. But then I thought, oh, maybe I'm just crazy. And then I'm like, duh, the lead character's name is Elsa. As in Elsa Lanchester so I was like, okay, so whoever made I would kill to talk to the people who wrote this movie to see if those are all intentional.
Can we get them on the show?
I don't know. I mean, it felt really intentional, but the weirdest thing was that I just didn't see it the first couple of days because I'm just watching some kids' entertainment. I'm not watching it for me. Yeah. And once I kind of just let over and I'm watching this thing going, okay, this is, whatever, it's fun. And at a certain point, I was like, oh, this is Frankenstein. This is right. It was really strange.
So have you picked up on the cannibal element and bubble guppies yet?
No, I haven't seen that yet. But anyway, so that I needed to throw that out there. Have you seen it?
I have, and now that you mention it, it seems very clear that I should have been looking at it.
Watch it. If you watch it again, just think and tell me.
Yeah, I mean, we've watched it about 5 or 6 times. Yeah. I've got a 3.5-year-old at home, and when I watch it, I just look at it and see that the movie doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. It's like 1 minute she's turning things to ice, the next minute she's making a castle, then a dress, and then she's killing people. It's very bizarre. Bringing snowmen to life, and it doesn't make any sense. But now that you mention it, it actually does kind of,
especially the start and end. Like of a village chasing you out.
Now I might be able to convince Dave to watch it because I've tried, and he's always like, "No, it's cartoon and it's Disney, and we're gonna have to watch it enough when she gets older." Because right now we're still in she's just over 1 now, so we're in the Peppa Pig Bubble Guppies phase.
Right.
So
well, keep in mind, I'm not giving it a
all
green
horrifying
stamp.
In their own right.
They are.
I'm not necessarily saying this is a green stamp everyone should watch. I'm saying why I think it's successful, and I'm not even joking. I think it's successful because it taps into something that made us all horror fans, and made not just horror fans. I think the Universal monster movies are the ones that went far broader than people who loved horror. Yeah. I think it was something about the shadows and being young and seeing black and white images when TVs were no longer black and white. All of those things, and I feel like there's something about this movie that maybe is tapping into that with kids. And just throwing catchy show tunes, and suddenly
doesn't make it a better movie, though. Unfortunately,
and probably not. But maybe I think I was kind of excited the last time I watched it. I was like, "Hey, that's
a new reason to watch it."
Yeah, exactly. But Elsa has to be a giveaway, right? Because that's a very rare name. The lead character is Elsa. It's like, come on.
Yeah, you might be onto something.
Yeah.
There you go.
So this week, similar to what I was doing last week, I ran out of space on our massive DVD wall, which is what I call it because it's literally a wall that we have dedicated to our DVDs and VHS tapes. And we officially ran out of space where we were stacking things on top of each other and it looked like crap. So we started watching pieces of our collection that we'd never seen before and then deciding whether they were worth keeping or selling. So last week I watched After Party and it was terrible and we sold it.
It should have been like a YouTube. You guys should have done a YouTube of this where people could vote on whether you trash it, keep it or trash it, keep it or trash it.
So, this week we watched a whole bunch of stuff, but the one that I wanted to talk about this week was we watched Carriers. Which I had heard a lot of great reviews on, and people were like, "Oh, it's such a good
Chris
film."
From Star Trek?
Pine? And Christopher Meloni. I don't know how to say his name. And I wasn't too fond of it. It was really bleak. That's about all I can say for it. I liked the lead character. Of course, he went on to do Star Trek, so I guess
That's not the kind of movie you own.
Yeah, that's
It's
kind
one of those
what I
one-watch
realized.
Redbox, not you.
It was one of these things like Seasoning House. Like, I got a copy of Seasoning House as a screener, and I was like, why do I own this? I'm never going to watch it again. It's bleak enough for the first time. You don't need to cover it again. So, yeah, Carriers. But, I mean, it was an interesting setup, and it was definitely a cheap film, like cheap to make. And I think that it was kind of interesting in that regard. Like, you could tell that it really didn't cost a whole lot because it was only like 7 actors through the whole thing.
Do you think Walking Dead, the success of something on TV every week, is killing that kind of storyline in movies? Like when I see a movie now with that storyline, I'm like, I get that every week already. You know?
Yeah, but that was before something like Walking Dead was like
Carriers,
a cultural.
Carriers was like 2009.
I feel like I only started like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I feel like I only got it a couple of years ago.
He made it before Star Trek, but it came out after.
And
like
anyway,
right
regardless
after.
of Carriers, I just mean in general, like that just that kind of storyline. Not even zombies, just anything to do with a virus, anything to do with post-apocalyptic.
Anything post-apocalyptic now, you're going to have to wow me with something a little bit better than an infection. I think that's it. I get a little bored and antsy now when it gets to that. Because like at Screamfest this year, I remember, because you were with me, we saw like 3 different post-apocalyptic films, and they all did something different, but every single one, it was the theme of it's a deserted landscape, post-apocalyptic. It's a group of people walking, and then some various shit happens while they're walking. And no matter how interesting they presented it, if it had that setup, I was kind of like,
is there an ecology one? I'm just not using my brain, so I'm going to ask you. Is there one where, humans have just basically, like doing what we're doing, we fucked up, and now the planet's just fucked, and it's people trying to survive in that kind of a world? That to me, I mean, water world.
Last winter?
Yeah.
The end gets into that, but not too much.
Yeah, but
Does
that's
it have
not
to be-
already
Does
post-apocalyptic.
it have to be post-apocalyptic? I mean, like, Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. I think it was like pesticides.
Yeah,
interesting.
pesticides.
Right.
And it
So-
was with Let's Scare Jessica, or no, Grapes of Death. Is that right? The Gene Roland
That's
film?
Jean Roland, yeah.
Yeah, that's also like a pesticide thing.
Huh. And It's Alive 2 is that they trace it to a pesticide. I remember they're like, they were spraying near here, and Frederick Forrester's like,
The Bay,
twirling his mustache.
which I actually really like.
That's right. You're right. That's ecological
That's
horror.
ecological. So yeah, there's a couple. And I mean, most of the time when you get into ecological horror, it's always the effects on the animals, like frogs or them, or
What's the Mark Wahlberg film?
Phase 4.
happening.
It's the bees, the
happening.
bees.
Hey, donkey.
So yeah. Carriers, I was not too into. It was bleak.
Stephen
That's
King
about all I
loved
got.
it. That's that's all I remember about that is and I just looked it up. He wrote like this big piece for EW.
I
about
I remember
that.
when he wrote this.
about
Yeah.
how much he loved that movie.
It's kind of Stand-esque without the cool plot line.
It is actually. It looks like, what a modern stand would look like.
Yeah, but what I loved that I was just obsessed with all week, and it became the focus of my week, I binge watched True Detective. And it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Never heard of it? No. I don't know. It was some show that I watched on like
look so late
Lifetime
to
or
the party.
Oxygen or something. I know. Well, it was because
How does it play binge watching? I can't. That show was one I actually liked looking forward to. Unlike some shows, I liked because it is slower and it still held up watching it all.
Because it was still like each episode, even though that it's much more of it's not in a rush to get anywhere. And it's not set up like a Law and Order or Supernatural where they're going to leave you with a cliffhanger of, is she going to gamble her savings away or anything like that? But it still had enough of a cliffhanger, like finding the mural on the church wall ended one of the episodes.
Don't tell them anymore.
And then that was like the second episode.
spoilers.
And, then we had to figure out what happened. So it still did have enough of intrigue to keep it moving along. But what I realized that I liked about it is that it's structured like a book, where it's got like 3 different timelines that are bouncing back and forth between them, and it goes back and forth kind of without regard or reason a lot of the time.
Yeah, it would be pretty complicated if it was like over a normal channel.
Yeah.
20 episodes would be too much.
So it's not paced like a television show, and it's not paced like a film. It's something completely different. Like it works well as a mini series just because of that. But yeah, I think
a lot of shows would benefit from a structure where, even Hannibal, we're talking about, and I would love to know what Brian Fuller says about this. He probably has made some statement, but the idea that you know exactly where you're going. And whether it's 4 seasons, 5 or 6 or 3, you have to, if you don't, and you're like, we'll get to 3 and then hopefully we'll get a couple more seasons. Those shows just don't work anymore, I think, because we are all expecting movie like narratives from TV, that True Detective seemed to be the best use of that so far. And Breaking Bad, of course, because clearly they knew at a certain point how to wrap it up. I'm watching Mad Men and going, I don't know if I know now you know where you're ending because it's the last season, but there's moments where I'm like, I feel like you didn't know this 2 seasons ago. Even though I still like it, it's not as tight.
It's like Supernatural has come for me.
And
where
Walking
I'm
Dead
just
has
like,
no clue.
Please stop. But with True Detective, it's weird because there's a certain inaccessibility to it because just the way that it's paced and stylized and how elaborate the setups are and kind of overproduced it is, because like it's a brilliant story and it's a fantastic thing and it's something that like I know my mom would like, but I wouldn't recommend it to her because she wouldn't be able to get over the setup of it and the way that it's presented to get to the story. So
but your mom likes seeing Woody Harrelson get laid.
She does. It's on like her top 10 list of things to do. Watch Woody Harrelson.
That's what I like about
laid.
that show is he's the one getting all the tail and Matthew McConaughey's the weirdo in the corner.
But Matthew McConaughey was the much more attractive one of the bunch.
Says you.
I think so. But what shocked me is I watched it within one night. I watched the first 2 episodes of True Detective, and then I watched Matthew McConaughey in Mud, which was great. And then at the end of this, I was sitting there and I was like, when did McConaughey get so good? Like, I'm looking back and I'm like, I still remember him as
I bet
like,
if you looked at
stoner.
Twitter, that's like the main conversation of last year on Twitter. Like, so in terms of like the
He's
geek
actually
film
always
culture.
been a really good actor.
He's always been. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to justify when their agents are choosing such bad films. But you're right. It's not like he wasn't good when he started. He's amazing. Dazed and Confused, boom, great. And Time to Kill is pretty good.
But he did a whole bunch of like
but then
action films with his shirt off, and
well,
I just
that
remember
and a
like
lot
a
of
large
those
chunk of
romantic comedies, and that there was nothing in those roles. You often wonder. I remember there was that quote by George Clooney about Batman, and it was right after Batman, and he talked to his accountant, and he said to the accountant, "Oh, where are we? What's our position?" And his accountant said, "You never have to do one of those again." And that was it.
Well, his whole career changed. You never have to do anything again.
Exactly.
That was
you
what it was.
choose what you want to make now, and so he directs movies. And I think McConaughey just has reached that spot where he's a good actor.
He can do whatever he wants.
He can go all Day-Lewis if he wants.
Yeah. And I watched Wolves of Wall Street with him, and he was one of the perks of that as well.
He was one of the best things about it.
Yeah, I've got 2 episodes left on True Detective, and I like it, and I think it's great television. I don't think it's the greatest thing on the planet, like everyone is saying, including you guys. I mean, it's all right, and I definitely don't think it's genre at all.
But I mean,
really?
You can be wrong and still smart.
Wait till
in
the
last 2 episodes?
Yeah. The last episode is where it gets genre.
If you're doing a show that's 8 episodes long and you're telling me that there might be a horror element in the last episode, then it's not really genre.
It's Silence of the Lambsy, where through the whole Silence Lambsy, I like that. It's Lambsy.
I think it's as horror as Silence of the Lambs. It's as horror, as much horror as that would be.
Okay.
It has its, at the core of it.
Don't get me wrong. It's really, I don't want people like jumping down my throat. It's really good. And I mean,
it's not saying you have to like it. It's
they're attacking you on Twitter now.
The caliber of actors that are in it is something unusual for television. But I think it's really, really good.
I'm going to take your side on this one, though. I mean, I've seen the whole series and I think it's very long winded. And when you said Silence of the Lambs, it's like, the last 2 episodes get a little too Silence of the Lambs. I think that if it was a 2.5-hour movie, it would be a really good 2.5-hour movie that was trying to be Silence of the Lambs. Right. But it's 8 hours. It's a little long-winded. And there's just
Did you watch it weekly or
weekly? We were there every week with it. Yeah,
I loved it.
I think it's good. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's great writing. It's well shot. I mean, it's cinematic television, which I think is great. I love that that's where we're headed because I.
Same writer-director, which was very rare.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like all episodes. That's unheard of pretty much.
Was it the same?
Yeah, same director, writer, every episode.
I'm getting to the point now where I look forward to television more than I do movies in a lot of respects.
Totally.
And I think it's good television, but I don't think it's as great as everybody's making it out to be. I think it is a little long-winded. And if it was, like I said, if it was a 2.5-hour movie, it'd be a great 2.5-hour movie.
I can't talk about the one thing that I think there's something in the ending that I wish so hard. We'll talk about it off camera.
Well, yeah, we'll get to it. But yeah, I mean, I've been trying to marathon it, but I do 2 at a time usually, and that's it. It's not like the type of television that I'm compelled, like, oh my God, I have to see what happens next.
I will say this about it, and this will hopefully convince Bekah to go all in, is I remember while I was watching, I was like, this is the best show I've seen on TV. Like about 6 episodes in, I was like, this is the best thing on TV. And then when it ended, I went back to the new season of Hannibal started, and I got to say, like, deep down my gut, I think Hannibal's the best damn show. Like, there's something in that. Season two is so good.
I wasn't fully on board with season 1.
It took me a long time.
But
to get
season 2
is Season 2 is just like hit the ground.
This has me on my edge of my seat. I love the aesthetic of the show. It's just gorgeous. it's just one of those shows you're like, you're doing it all right.
So far, it's one of the
hit their
best
stride.
seasons of genre television
Yeah.
that I've
Ever.
seen in I wouldn't say ever, but like in a really long time.
Yeah.
So like, when I'm in my 60s or 70s and I'm talking about my top 10 favorite genre horror shows, it'll be there because it's right up there with some of the best well-written, produced horror shows on television. It's going to stand the test of time, I think.
I'm excited just because Brian Fuller, who's we're hoping to have on soon, is he wrote some of my favorite Star Trek episodes ever. He also wrote Pushing Daisies, which I
interesting. I didn't know.
absolutely loved. And then they canceled it after 2 seasons. But I don't even know if it made it that far, but I absolutely loved that show.
I heard most people are predicting right now that even if it gets canceled, it's going to be fine. Like it's going to. Amazon was the one I was hearing.
Yeah, there's no way
Weird, I
that
heard
somebody wouldn't pick it up.
Oh, really? Well, that's the Netflix makes sense, but I kind of don't want it. The only cool thing about it being on Netflix is maybe they could push certain things a little further, but I feel like they're pushing it about as far as you could go.
Yeah,
you know?
it's unbelievable. what
It's
they
not
get away
often
with.
that I'm watching it going, I wish I'd seen more gore. I'm always like, this is on TV. I'm looking around
This
like,
is a bit much.
how is, they're cutting into a body or they're eating something.
One of the rare shows we cannot eat dinner while we're watching.
Right, yeah.
Ooh, that sounds kind of
It really is a
interesting
surprise,
now.
but I agree. I think also the first 3 episodes of the first season take a while to divorce yourself from the casting and the mythology, and it just, your brain has to almost get used to this new world.
Yeah.
And then once you get into it, by the very end of season 1, I was really into it, and when season 2 came, I was like, wow, this whole, I think it was the one where bodies are in a circle in the eye.
Oh God,
That was like, this
insane.
is like a different level
Just
of
stuff you can't ever
TV.
think about. Like,
Yeah.
you could never think up the stuff they're doing.
Yeah,
I lent Becca season 1, so it'll be interesting. I always say season 1, it's good, but it's a tough pill to swallow.
I'll
So if
be
you can get
binge
through
watching
it-
that when I get back from Colorado.
Yeah, that'd be good. It'd be good to see what you think. I think
Did
you'll like it.
anyone watch the first episode of Salem?
Yes.
Was it good?
I liked it.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to tell from one episode, but I'm on board. I'm willing to give it, a shot. So
Is
I'm
it
gonna,
set now or in the past?
in the past.
in the past.
Yeah,
I'm a witch fan, so
Yeah,
I was
no.
hoping that it was good. I have it ready to go at home.
It's
so
another
I'm
one
kind
that
of
takes
psyched.
the first episode takes a little while to get going once you're introduced to the characters and you sort of see where they are. And it's by the end of the first episode, it had me enough that I'm willing to give it, another couple of episodes and see how it goes. But
I wish they would have said it modern. I think the idea, after Lords of Salem especially, I feel like the idea of a modern Salem, like this town that's a modern town where something like this was reemerging would be so interesting to me. But, I guess everyone's just kind of
I
into
think
the
that's
period.
what people would expect them to do. Though.
Probably.
So
I guess the WB thing, yeah.
Taking it and making it, sort of like a period piece, I think was probably smart on their end because there really isn't anything else like it on television.
Right.
It might be a little too much like American Horror Story Coven or some
Right.
other more like modern retellings of like Salem and the witch trials and all that sort of stuff. So I think they actually made a smart choice by making it
Setting it a
period.
period.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because there isn't really
I have to
anything
see
else
it.
like it on television right now. I mean, Dracula, that's not around anymore, is it? And that was,
I think
Yes,
it's going to be.
its season ended, but I think it's got a renewal of some kind.
there's not
How
really.
is that possible?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
This is
watched all of the
Dracula.
episodes.
Did you really?
I am the reason it's still
Are
on.
you serious?
Yeah, it's one of those shows where, once you have kids, you're not going out necessarily on a Friday. So when you come home, if there's a show like that, you might watch it late after everyone's gone to bed. I kind of liked it mostly only because of his performance. It's pretty fun. He reminds me of Udo Kier's Dracula and Paul Morrissey. So, but it isn't great, but it's better than some of the genre set shows, I would say. I don't think it's the worst of them. The problem with it is it's not offering much new.
Now, was
to the
Sleepy
tip.
Hollow good this year?
I didn't
'Cause
watch
I
that
didn't
one.
watch that one at
No,
all.
I didn't watch it either.
No, I know Ryan and those guys watch that and Grimm. I mean,
See,
yeah,
I never
there's a
got
lot of
into
shows.
Grimm because Grimm was just like a new animal character each week. Like this week we're battling the rat people, and next week it's the bat people, and I never got into Grimm too much.
That's the difference. Is like these episodic ones are maybe less interesting than the ones we're all talking about. This TV where you are really hooked into the characters and the story, the Uber story.
Who wants a Pop-Tart?
I'll take a piece of Pop-Tart.
Well, there's 2. Lawrence brought Pop-Tarts, everyone. There's 2. I'm
sharing my dinner.
So do you want one out of this package?
I will take one out of that
I'll go
package.
Pop-Tart free. I just ate.
There you go. Here, take one.
Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing says Pop-Tart. Are we going? We got your choice before. I was going to use that as a segue to Italian cinema.
Obviously,
because they would never eat Pop-Tarts in Italy.
Well, believe it or not, I did not get an opportunity to watch much this week at all. So I really don't have anything other than stuff that's going to play into our topic, Italian horror. I watched a few things there. The only thing I wanted to bring up, the reason being is because my parents moved to Arizona. So I took a little field trip there over the weekend. And it's horror themed, so I had to bring it up. I ate at a little restaurant called Cooperstown, which if you're from Phoenix, Arizona, Alice Cooper lives out there, and he has his own restaurant in the middle of
cool.
right across the street from where the the sports arena is. And essentially it's just a Hard Rock Cafe sort of thing. It's very music oriented, but because it's near the Coliseum, it's also sports themed. So it's like if a Hard Rock Cafe collided with a sports bar.
But he's also a big sports guy. I know he's a big golfer and a basketball fan. So.
Here's the fun thing about it. Because it's called Cooperstown, every employee that works there has to wear the eye makeup, the Alice Cooper eye makeup. Wow. So I kind of like imagine. So if you guys work at TGI Fridays or Applebee's, at least you don't have to wear the eye makeup.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
But it's awesome.
That's their flair, I guess.
That's their flair. They all look like the
better than having to dress like his Prince of Darkness character. Imagine that. They're all like homeless and smelly.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
Is there any pictures of Prince of Darkness?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any stuff yet to his films. No, but so everyone's got the quote unquote crow makeup. But the reason I like it is because, and I wanted to bring this up to you, is if you're like an Alice Cooper fan or a genre fan, he tends to have all his dishes named after stuff. So like you don't just order a burger; they have like the Rob Zombie AZ burger. And, the Nightmare Nachos. I ordered the No More Mr. Nice Guy chicken chipotle pasta. I don't know. You get all excited. You're like, you know what? I want to have that. And the last time I was there, they had the Megadeth meatloaf, which they no longer have on the menu.
Many conversations were had before Jump Cut.
The suspense is killing me. How was the food?
It's actually pretty good. Yeah. Okay. I'd say
it's actually pretty. I'm already out. I'm like when it's like a dot. No.
It doesn't matter. The gimmick worked.
Okay.
I ate there. I ordered stuff. And actually, I tweeted to Brian Collins because they had like the Nickelback nachos. Or no, the quesadilla. And he's like, man, I would be so conflicted about ordering that.
I'm going to start a shocker-themed place for Brian Collins.
Oh, my God, that'd be amazing. But,
it's like Denny's used to have the Taking Back Sunday fries. They did like a whole music-themed menu at some point.
Oh, did they? Mm-hmm. So my suggestion, you've already thought about this.
It's been a million conversations were had about how terrible an idea it is to name your food after
You know what? Not for nothing. I don't think it's a terrible idea because back in New York, the Two Boots Pizza, which is combined with theater, all their slices were named after different, like the Mr. Pink slice.
And Alamo does it.
I think it'd be cool if you had a couple things, but once the whole menu gets gimmicked, I don't know.
You need 2 or 3 gimmicks on your menu because I would order them just because of the name.
I will call,
and most people will.
And Alamo does it. I mean, they have like the Blues Brothers burger, and
I'll
have what she's having pasta and things like that. So.
There you go. See, I want to eat those things.
I don't think that's part of the regular menu though. I think that's when they do like special menus. I think that the regular menu is like chicken Caesar wrap.
I think the Alamo has some integrity.
I always go
I think the only things that are named like that I think are like stuff from like Tarantino films. They have like a $5 milkshake.
Yeah, listen, I always go to the one.
All I wanted was the Blue DC. Sunshine. I want something called the Blue Sunshine.
You should do that.
I just don't know. I wanted to from day one. I just don't know what would be good blue. I guess same with blueberries. I was thinking of a drink like a blue.
You get like Blue Croco. It's like,
but that's alcohol.
It is.
And I'm talking about non-alcoholic.
You can't serve alcohol.
Okay, fine.
A blueberry something.
You can get blue grenadine cherries.
Okay.
Listen, all I'm saying is the shocker, No More Mr. Nice Guy hot chicken sandwich would be a big hit, and I bet Brian Collins would.
I'm going to do a Pinkus. I'm going to do something Pinkus for him, just for him, and I won't tell him. The Pinkus quesadilla. That's what I'm going to do for him.
Fair enough.
Lucky he doesn't listen to podcasts.
But you got to serve it with a really spicy sauce, so you can call it the shocker.
Yeah, right. the shocker. So speaking of Italian cinema.
Yeah. Speaking of, great segue. Lawrence, did you see anything that you wanted to mention in the last couple of weeks? Good stuff that you could recommend?
Non-genre, I saw Noah, and I liked it. So I'll just throw that out there. I will say that at an early age, I got my son into watching Scooby-Doo. I made an effort to try to get him into that so he wouldn't have to do the Frozen thing. So we watched a lot of Scooby-Doo this week because Scooby-Doo is like his most favorite thing in the whole wide world.
What's the one we were just watching? That's got like a good... That might be a good genre gateway sort of.
Totally is. It absolutely
Didn't we talk about that? I told you that was mine.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the first things that I showed him. Like I just put it on Boomerang just to sort of see if it would take.
Old Scooby-Doo? Like that old...
That was where we started. Like
the new thing. Have you seen that new show? It's unwatchable. Whatever it is. It's like real action.
He'll watch any Scooby-Doo. Okay. So, but like I started with like the 69, 70, and that's where he started. And he likes that. He likes the new stuff. He likes it all. Although sometimes when the characters look different or their voices are different, he'll be like, who is that?
Yeah,
like,
which makes sense, right?
I'm like, that's Daphne. He's like, that's Daphne?
Well, there was one when they were kids.
I love your kid is Jerry Seinfeld. 3.5. Jerry Seinfeld's your 3-year-old. He's like, that's Daphne?
It's more like George
He was wearing a bow tie at the party last week.
That's right, he was.
So.
He's very fancy. That was his choice.
But Scooby-Doo's the perfect. It's just everything about those old because it has the spooky, but then it also explains it. So if you're a kid, it also demystifies.
Mm-hmm. And it's great for me because when we're at Target and I see Scooby-Doo and WrestleMania, I'm like, oh, we have to get this for Max. I mean, it's not for me at all. I don't want to see Scooby-Doo and WrestleMania.
Oh, he likes wrestling too.
He doesn't know that he likes wrestling.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
I anticipate that he will like wrestling.
Of course he will.
But
then we're going to pour one out for the Ultimate Warrior.
And so anyway, and then I watched, and actually this is actually the perfect segue into our talk of Italian cinema. I happened to watch Della Morte dell'Amore this week, Cemetery Man, because a German company re-released. They did like a media book version of it, and actually, they have a 3D version of it on there too. I guess they post converted it into 3D. Wow. I don't have a 3D.
Fancy.
I don't have a 3D TV or Blu-ray.
We got to use your TV, Rob.
And so I
it's
can't
an import. I can't play it.
It's.
I have a region.
It says it's
Blu-ray.
region B, but it played on the 2D version. Played on my Blu-ray player, so I can't speak for the other discs.
German discs in general. Every time I've had a German import, it's played on an American. I don't know.
I didn't have any trouble with the 2D
No.
disc, so you can try the 3D disc if you
I'd
want.
like to.
I
Yeah,
have
I'd like
a
to see that in
Burial
3D.
Ground steelbook that I got from the Extracast guys, who I hope are listening, and it will only play on my region list.
But that's just because they screwed you. Damn it.
I don't think
And it's because
so.
Burial Ground shouldn't be playing on screen.
So I
should.
revisited Della Morte dell'Amore this week, which is a
Cool.
movie that I really enjoy, and so that's basically.
And a lot of what I was reading about Italian cinema just before coming, and that's always been a favorite, but a lot of them use that as the kind of the end point of the high point of Italian horror films was Della Morte dell'Amore. That was kind of the shifting.
I am posing this question at the beginning. I watched an Italian film 2 years ago that I thought was amazing, and I was like, this is the return of Italian cinema, Tulpa. Did anybody else see this?
What's it called?
Tulpa, Tulpa.
I haven't heard of that.
And I can't say that it exactly had a plot that I can recall. I'm sure it did. I remember it being highly sexualized. But I remember I saw it at AFM back in like 2011. So it's been a couple of years. And I remembered walking out of it thinking, holy shit, this is like the return of like really good like 70s Italian cinema. And then nothing ever happened with the movie. I don't even know if it got released. So I actually wrote Tulpa ? Hoping that you would have an answer.
I never heard of it.
Nope. Okay. Well, then we got to look it up. Tulpa.
Yeah, on his third strike, the show's over. What did they do to Solange?
I'm gonna have to get these
Could
2
you
strikes
kill a
out
child?
real
Right.
quickly,
Timer.
so I can get the hell out of here.
Could you kill a duckling?
Yeah. No,
Or torture a
Don't
duckling.
torture a duckling.
Yeah.
I guess the interesting thing is how do you first come into seeing any Italian cinema? Was it starting with something like Argento or Bava, or was it something more obscure that you first kind of saw back when you were doing this stuff?
I mean, for me, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole tape trading thing. Back in, I guess it was the early 90s. Again, I'm going to age myself. I was in my early 20s, and I was in college, and I had a Laserdisc player. And I actually just started to meet people, and we just started to like trade tapes. So I was the guy who would provide the widescreen versions of American horror films because nobody else had a Laserdisc player. So I'd get them the widescreen version of Halloween off of the Criterion Laserdisc, or the Elite remasters of A Nightmare on Elm Street or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And they would trade with me Cannibal, Holocaust, and Tenebre, and Suspiria, and all these other uncut horror films. So that was really, when I really started to get into it. It was, that stuff wasn't very common back then. I mean, you could get some Argento in video stores. You can get Tenebre under the name Unsane, I think it was called.
Yeah.
What was your first Argento? Do you remember?
My first Argento was probably Suspiria, I think.
Was it all yours?
You know what? Mine was Creepers,
Mine
which is
too.
actually Phenomenon.
Probably a lot
but
of
it was
people,
released
yeah,
as
because of
Creepers
that,
here,
yeah.
and it was an edited version. And Argento is definitely my first introduction into Italian horror. Like,
Right.
I think it was Creepers, and then maybe Suspiria and Deep Red, that early stuff in opera, and that because you look at Argento's films and they're just so different from everything else and
even within, like I think I probably had seen Creepers, but it probably didn't register as an Argento film. Probably just was a movie I saw, and then I remember seeing Suspiria and being up to just even in the first 10 minutes where she's outside the house in the taxi in the rain, looking at the person running through the woods. I remember and not being able to hear over the phone. I remember thinking that was so unusual from what I'd seen before. And I couldn't work it out. And I almost didn't know if I liked it or not, but it was very powerful. I mean, that first screening of Suspiria is probably like second or third most powerful kind of screening of my life, like how The Shining first, because it was just different. When it ended, I wasn't sure if I necessarily got it. But man, you're watching a different type of movie. Whereas, I don't think I felt that when I saw Creepers. I think I probably also, because Creepers was a trimmed down cut.
Yeah,
right?
it was.
And so that probably, was just like, hey, this is a cool, crazy movie.
Yeah, we had Creepers in my house. I found Tulpa. It's still an Italian import that you have to have imported. But We had creepers in my house when I was a kid, and I remember that I loved Labyrinth, so I loved Jennifer Connelly and just about anything she did. So I watched Creepers at a really young age, but it was a cut one, and I never even made the connection of it being a horror film. It was just that trippy film about that girl who could control bugs. And
which was probably purposeful to make it more like Labyrinth, right? Like probably people were like, oh, let's get these two films to be closer.
Totally.
And so it didn't really even register for me. But I saw Suspiria when I was in high school with Ben Owen, who was like my friend in high school that I used to watch horror films with all the time. Like every weekend we would watch one. And I remember that we rented that one. And it's weird because the cover is a little deceptive because it shows like her face and there's like a body hanging behind her. And it said like the only thing more terrifying than the first 10 minutes is like the last 70 or something like that. But we weren't expecting it to be quite as artistic and stylized as it is. And I remember that we both just absolutely loved it.
And I think that's what sets Italian cinema apart is the putting narrative logic aside and saying we're going to let the aesthetic logic, which is its own thing, or this kind of narrative, a totally different form, take the ride. Especially Fulci is like for me, the Beyond is maybe the high point of where that goes, where it's like, no, seriously, no narrative. No. Too narrative. Get rid of that too, and let's see what happens. See if people get it. It's going to be clunky in parts, and other parts are just going to blow you away. It's. Do you remember the first time seeing like Beyond?
I mean, I think you think about like the moments of these films,
right.
And it's not necessarily about the cohesive whole of the film. It's about the moments, and I guess you're a little more forgiving because the moments are so far above and beyond anything that you've seen from American filmmakers that you're willing to sort of forgive and get into it. I don't remember the first time that I saw The Beyond, but the Beyond is definitely one of those examples of those movies that it's like you remember it being a great movie, but you remember it being a great movie because of these little moments.
Totally. Because there's other things that are like really like some of the stuff in the house and a body being tortured and just kind of it's clunky.
And there's also a lot of other goofy stuff in a lot of the movies. They sometimes had weird casting choices and
dubbing.
Really the dubbing was always very weird.
Always strange.
It's not the kind of thing where like you laugh at the dubbing because like the dialogue's silly. You laugh at the dubbing just because it was done so. It wasn't very professional, and it just doesn't lend itself well to the movie. And sometimes the effects aren't that great. I mean, when they're good, they're good, but when they're not good, they're not good, and that's part of the problem. But so you have to be a little more forgiving with them. But it's definitely
one filmmaker who like I think transcends exactly what we're saying is that strength. Is he did both. Pretty much narrative cohesion. It was a great film. It kind of like the Hitchcock of that is Bava. I mean, he's a great filmmaker. If you put him in anywhere, it seems like he could really. But Bava's like one of the most skilled directors on earth.
Bava has some great stuff.
Yeah, not Lamberto.
Say,
sorry, Lamberto. Let me.
If you watch the entire, we have the entire Bava box set, which documents everything he's done, and there are definitely some high points and low points in there.
Anyone making movies, that's the case. I'm just saying, like, unlike some of these directors who are really like Fulci, especially creating or Argento creating amazing moments, I think that Bava's a lot more even in the way he directed. It feels like he's much more of a classical.
He's like a director's director, I guess you could say. And the thing about Bava too is that like a lot of these other the Argentos and the Fulcis were really out to sort of they were kind of taking the exploitation angle in a lot of respects, seeing how far they could go. Bava made a lot of PG-rated horror films. If you want to get your kid into horror films, there are a lot of great Bava films to show them, like Barren Blood, and these are like Saturday morning creature feature type movies you would watch on TV. They're not overly gory, they're not overly sexual. A lot of them are like basically just like either like PG-rated Hammer horrors or Universal horror movies, and some of them are really good. Stylish and scary, great characters. And they don't tend to not verge as much into the silly as a lot of the other movies do. So there are some great Bavas that are restrained that are.
And I think he's like Hitchcock in the sense that he actually suited that more. I think once you pull a director like that survives into the 70s, it actually what they're doing maybe doesn't suit it as much. And probably doing like Bad Blood, it's brilliantly made. It's a really well made movie, but maybe he's not as comfortable with nudity and some of these things, it's always hard to know.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Mario Bava with you guys in particular, because I'm not familiar with his stuff at all, really. Other than I saw Bay of Blood or Twitch of the Death Nerve,
Mask of Satan.
which is
Also, I think it's also called Black Sunday.
Black Sunday. Yeah. So
that's like the greatest movie
Black Sunday's
ever.
the one I actually watched before I came here because I have the box set and I actually tweeted like
on Blu-ray or DVD.
DVD. I don't know if I know
I want to see it on Blu-ray.
I think Kino's the one that's doing them separately, but I bought an Anchor Bay box set on DVD a couple years ago.
Is it the Bava box set?
Yeah. It's like five movies, and there's a second volume as well.
They did two of them.
I have both of them if you want to continue.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know his material that well, and I asked Twitter before I got here, which one should I watch out of this box set? And it was unanimously, for the most part, Black Sunday. So
it's
I think there's a couple equal.
Interesting. But what stands out for you guys from Mario?
I mean, to me, the birth of giallo, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, is like one of the best made films ever. It's not really it's not that horrorish. John Saxon's in it. It's a black and white. It's basically an expressionist film. It's gorgeous, like some of the best lighting I've ever seen. It's funny because I think it's probably the only black and white giallo, but it's also the first giallo. I think it's called The Evil Eye as well. It's a gorgeous movie, and it's the one where I was like, oh, Bava's a hell of a good filmmaker. It's also a weird romance. It's a lot more playful than what giallo would become.
Right.
We'll get into that as a subgenre. Yeah. On top of that, Kill Baby Kill's really interesting. Right. It's again a totally different world.
Yeah.
You know?
Kidnapped was always, and it's weird because it's one that doesn't get a lot of notoriety for him. And I think it's because it's not quite a horror film. It's more kind of like when you get into like the Candy Snatchers area of the 70s. But
that's where I feel like his stuff doesn't. I feel like when he goes in Seven and Lisa and the Devil and stuff like that, it's just a little messier.
I didn't mind it. Yeah. That's and I love Mask of Satan, but for some reason, Kidnapped I always
I feel
really
like with Lisa and the Devil, that's when he starts to become a little unrestrained. And I feel like, where you're going with like, the earlier films, when like his earlier giallo films and like even like early slasher films, he was a little more restrained and he wasn't really going in the exploitation angle. He was really trying to make movies,
Because he must have been old, right? By the time the 70s are rolling around, he must have been a 70. And you have to remember, like, these guys trying to be like, have girls having sex and then being cut up. It's like, that must be kind of weird when you're a grandfather or something. Yeah. I mean, there is that weird.
It's weird. He
actually
passed away in 1980 at age 65.
Oh.
That's kind of crazy.
That's very young.
Yeah.
I take back the last 3 minutes. But he's still oldish. Old enough to have a son directing with you.
But going the giallo route, I really always liked Blood and Black Lace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really nice one.
Which is the other film that probably had more of an influence on the genre than the earlier film I was just mentioning because of the color patterns, the black gloves, masks. And if people haven't seen that, that's a film. When we talk about movies that would benefit from Blu-ray, that film would look stunning. Is there a Blu-ray of that?
I don't know.
That would look so good.
I think Kino has the bulk of the lot. Oh, you know what? Actually, that's one that Anchor Bay didn't have. That was originally released on DVD by VCI, I think.
Huh.
So if anybody did or would release a Blu-ray, I think it would be VCI. I think they still own the rights to it.
Yeah, I mean, I was before we came on, I was thinking like some of the hallmarks, not so much of giallo, but just of like Italian horror films, and it seems like it's the same as things that are about their society. It seems like fashion, sexual repression / obsession. They're like this because if you ever go to Italy, I'm not Italian. I just remember I found it a kind of a menace. I'm not Italian.
Never would have.
I know. They call it New Zealand Italian. Exactly, but it's very. I found it kind of a threatening place in the sense that the men walk around in packs. If I was with a girlfriend traveling and a group of 10 guys will start following you. And you're just like, I don't know how this ends, But also, those same 10 guys probably all live at home with their mothers until they're like married and out of the house, and that's a very different. I think that creates this like repression of sexuality, which only makes people. So I think that the style of it. But there's a lot of about I've never been able to account for in a like there's such unusual films and the recurring themes. There's why are there always animal titles? I have no idea. Why is J&B whiskey in every single, you know what I mean? I don't, there's a lot of the specifics about what these films are that's why I want somebody to make that big film about.
I think they just picked up on each other and just kind of like kept the ball rolling. Yeah. It was kind of like this, like Diodato and Lenzi battling with the cannibal movies. Like, it's like Lenzi would release one, then Diodato would release one, then Lenzi, and they would just go back and forth trying to outdo each other. I feel like they just picked up. And these sort of like tropes sort of just became
and they're popular too, right? Like the first couple did really well.
Sure, yeah,
kind of set it off.
Well, I kind of like that Italian cinema for the most part always capitalized on what was a good idea and then did the copycat version of it. Like I think you were talking about aquatic horror last week.
I love my Italian shark films.
And then all of a sudden we've got like Cruel Jaws, which I'm on the hunt for, and whatever
Actually, I
other
have Cruel
Jaws ripoff movies.
I've got Cruel Jaws. I've got The Last Shark. I've got Monster Shark because I'm a huge fan of the Italian shark films. So I have a collection. So
Italian ripoff films in general, like they really did great zombie movies too. Like Burial Ground is amazing. It's a horrible movie, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it just got so many great things in it you've never seen.
What's the one
before.
with the aerobics? I always talk Nightmare City.
Nightmare City.
It's just
Yeah.
crazy. It's
That's
just like
one-
suddenly there's an aerobic scene when zombies are coming in.
That's one that we have on our list, like the "We've never seen this, do we keep it?" list. So that should be coming up in a couple
You'll
of
keep
weeks.
it, but you won't watch it again.
And Fulci did one that was like a flash dance one.
Oh, really?
What's the name of it? Gosh, I can't remember. Killers. Oh man. Anyway, he did like some like flash dance slasher movie.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. It does.
Really bad, but like so good in its badness.
I always liked
The name's escaping me right
Cozy
now.
did his Alien ripoff, where he did Contagion.
Contamination. Yes.
Thank you. And but it's like Alien, and it's kind of the same concept of Alien, but it's set in the New York subway system, and it surprisingly has really good effects. I remember it being really gooey, but I always liked that one as an Alien ripoff.
You know what? I just was it Murder Rock?
Murder Rock. I was just looking it up. That's it. Murder Rock.
That is an
seen
amazing
that one.
title.
Yes.
I want to remake that.
It was basically like their answer to a slasher version of Flashdance.
Wow.
Wow.
That's kind of I've never seen that. That's kind of amazing. I got to check that out.
And again, it's like really just like I haven't seen it in so long, but I think that the killer takes needles and like inserts them like into the woman's breast and like pierces their hearts. It's just like very like methodical and well thought out, but like lots of like
Weird.
haze and leotards and disco music and very, very
Sounds like
strange.
then
Whoa.
opera was influenced by that or something.
Yeah, probably.
It's interesting.
Again, the idea of them cannibalizing their own ideas and
Yeah.
You know, I don't know much about. I
exploitation.
mean, I assume Mario Bava was the big influence on Dario in terms of other Italian directors. Were there others you think that?
I thought
Because I know Bava helped pull off the Inferno ending, and
Oh well, Lamberto was
but
Lamberto was,
Mario helped plan the mirror shot.
I think so.
Well,
but
there's also talk. I think it was Lamberto that was supposedly helped with the underwater scenes at the beginning.
Yeah,
I
that
can-
I've heard too. Yeah,
I can
I've heard both
confirm
of
that
those.
he actually shot that stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Because I did a lot of the interviews for that Blue Underground release, and Irene Miracle was talking about how Dario was fighting with his wife the entire time, and Lamberto shot all the underwater stuff in that movie.
Yeah.
It's funny how you hear about what I like about these kind of connections is like because I heard recently somebody was telling me or I was reading about demons, and I've always really liked demons, but a lot of people were saying that the first demons had a heavy hand from people like Argento and somebody else, the assistant director who did De La Morte. What's his name?
Michele Soavi.
Yeah, who we talked about on the show.
Soavi.
That their hand was very present in that. Why that film's so fun, and then the sequel, both of them were not involved, and that it's
For
just
Demons
Lamberto.
too?
Yeah, and that's just
Part
Lamberto's
two.
voice. They're both fun. It's fun, but the first one's a real horror film. It's like a really pushes, and it's like
Yeah.
with that soundtrack, and it just kind of keeps coming at you.
And it's one of the best of its type, where it's
Yeah.
like people locked in an isolated location,
Right.
and there's a force that they have to deal with. And you know, I'm one of those people. I do not like the second Demons. I mean, I think that the first Demons is a really great movie. I mean, it holds up with the best of them. And like when you watch it on Blu-ray, the effects hold up. Like,
Oh, man.
everything holds up. It does not. You know, some things look dated. You know, some of the characters, some of the things
the
that
dubbing
they
in that
say.
one is particularly strange. I
Yeah.
think. You know, trying to Americanize the
Totally,
voices of
yeah.
people really
I
hurts.
always
So you have to
liked
be a
the
little
second
forgiving with
one.
that.
I liked the
You like
idea.
demon babies.
I liked them moving through the television.
I think
I
that
liked
didn't that happen
element.
in
That
the
was
number one as
interesting.
well.
Wait,
no.
was that number one?
No,
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 it's
no,
number
that's
two.
That
Because
was
in
the
number
theater.
2, they're watching footage
Yeah.
of it because you've got the
apartment building.
demon zone, and then the demons come through the television. I kind of liked that element. I thought it was cool.
There's a great sequence in the underground parking garage of
Yeah.
Demons 2 that I like a lot, and I like that it's the same black guys in both movies as completely different roles. But yeah, if you revisit it or if you watch them back to back, Demons 2 gets kind of boring in comparison to the first
Ooh.
one. It's got its standout moments, but at the end of the day, you're like, ugh. But yeah, Synapse did those Blu-ray,
Great
those
Yeah.
limited edition
they're
Blu-ray.
amazing.
Probably, and I think I showed Elric a little
saw
bit.
a little bit. It looked
I mean,
really
it's like
clean.
one of the best, cleanest
looked good.
restorations I've ever seen of a movie.
Heaviest DVD ever.
Yeah.
And some big metal box. But I like
That's why it's
what I-
$45.
Yeah, exactly. But I like that it seems like you had like what you're saying about the Cannibal films being like competitive, and then on the other side you have all these directors who are making their own work but also working on each other.
Yeah.
It seems like such a great way to make interesting work. Whereas when nowadays it's just over here anyway, it's just studios and everything's about campaigns. There's other people too, like Martino. I don't know how he fits into the bigger picture. his films seem to me the most sexualized of the giallos, especially. I think he did Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward.
Yeah.
Which is
this is
always been one
Sergio
of my
Martino, the
favorites.
one that did Torso, right?
Yeah, and All the Colors of the Night.
Which I love.
That's a really good one too, yeah. But Strange Vice, it's sometimes the ones that are least horror-ish. It's the lesser horror ones that tend to be almost the most interesting. They'll be more about the sexual obsession part is the part that's so interesting. The weird slow-mo, the weird stylistic stuff.
Because All the Colors of the Night isn't...
Or the Dark? All the Colors of the Dark,
All the Colors of the Dark. I was thinking People Who Own the Dark and All the Colors of the Dark. But All the Colors of the Dark, I can't even say... I guess it's horror because it's got some weird satanic cult thing going on, but it is just so trippy and sexualized that it's hard to really even discern much plot out of it, but it's beautiful.
Which is, that stuff in general. I mean, and then people like Don't Torture a Duckling, which I don't know if that's giallo, not really, right? That's
I think people consider it to be. I mean, it's not one of the best examples, and it's just another one of those movies that's so convoluted, and there's so many like red herrings. And that was Fulci attempting to do giallo. I think that's like the first and only time he tried to do giallo.
It's a fascinating movie, though. I mean, it's really.
Well, what about New York Ripper?
That's more like slasher.
Straight slasher.
I mean, that's
and I think that's the end of a cycle. I feel like that is like. It's so bleak and grim and awful, but also kind of like as a film fan, I can get into it. But I remember when I first saw it, it just like bummed me out. And there's something about it that feels like the end of a cycle of films, and a director almost wanting it to end or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's got a downer of an ending, that's for sure.
Yeah,
It's just
and
one
a
of
great
those
soundtrack.
And that quacking is just
The quacking,
It just doesn't make any sense.
I kind of feel that way about Stendhal Syndrome. In some respects, I feel like Stendhal Syndrome is Dario Argento's last great movie. And then, but it's also very dark and bleak and not fun in a lot of ways to watch, and it's upsetting. Not just because of like what's happening on screen, but because you know that it's like him directing his daughter, and it's very bizarre
It's
and
weird and uncomfortable
very
for everybody
strange.
involved.
Yeah, but in a lot of respects, I do think of it as sort of being like the end of his era, where it's like I don't know if he'll ever make another movie like it. I think that was his.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. He had moments and things like Trauma. There'll be like some good scenes, but not a whole great film.
I think you have to be really forgiving to sort of pull those moments out of like any of those movies, whether it's like a Phantom of the Opera or
Still haven't seen that one, but
any of them. I mean, it's just like Sleepless to a certain extent, but I think like Sleepless sticks around because the soundtrack is probably
I was so hopeful
one of his
on that
best.
one.
It's
That
an
was the
amazing
one
soundtrack.
You see Max von Sydow and you're like, oh, he's back. I remember that feeling of going, oh, Argento's back. And
I didn't mind
just
the
wasn't
card
that great.
player. Everyone else hates
I
it,
liked the
but-
way it looked. I thought it had it was style. It reminded me of The Ward. Like the thing about Carpenter's The Ward is it shows he can direct still. I think no one really wrote about that. Like I was watching that film going, the story is totally forgettable. The scenario was seen a million times better on a Twilight Zone episode. It should be an hour, not an hour and a half. But there's something about the way it was put together. I was like, he still knows how to make a good movie.
Yeah.
And I feel similar with card players. Like, oh no, there's a good movie, but that DP is the DP of all of Gaspar Noé's stuff. And so I think it had, to be honest, it probably had more to do with this young, amazing French DP. It's
Right.
You never know though.
Yeah, I think when you're watching Stendhal, you're watching old classic Argento. I feel like when you're watching anything after, you're watching new Argento, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I feel like it was definitely the end of an era. I mean, it was.
Are you pro Mantis or anti Mantis?
You know what? The movie's terrible, but I'm pro Mantis.
More Mantis. I don't even need to see the whole movie to know more Mantis would make it a better movie.
The movie's really bad.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I wish
like,
there was
it's
more Mantis in
unfortunate.
it. It's like 2 seconds. And I watched it in 3D and fell asleep
Crazy.
like 3 times.
Wow.
Pretty awful.
It's also sitting on the stack of keep or get rid of.
What's his reputation? I mean, I'm asking you like you live in Italy, but because you're our guest,
You're from Italy. You should know
I am
these.
from Italy, formerly of Italy. What is his standing these days? Besides, obviously, he's our Hitchcock or whatever. But his modern films in Italy, are they seen as failures?
I don't even know
like
that
they are
people.
here?
I don't even know if people really even liked him that much back in the day when he was like in his heyday. I think that Americans embraced him more than I think a lot of these foreign directors. I don't think that they were necessarily embraced by like his or her people. I feel like American audiences embrace them more.
Ironic, given that Carpenter, has that famous quote about how in America he's a bum and in Europe he's
exactly.
an auteur.
Totally. Yeah. So,
it's almost like a reverse. Yeah, it's interesting.
I think a lot of these, like especially for foreign horror directors, like I don't think that Jean Rollin was ever respected, and I mean I don't know about Mario Bava, but I just feel like a lot of these like
but they kept getting to make movies.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking like if you keep, I guess is that just purely because the box office they kept making money.
I think it's the same way that we see some of our not so great indie horror people keep making movies. They make money because they do have these kind of exploited topics, and then they get a little bit back and they keep doing it.
Yeah, rolls
Would
into
you
the
like
next
to name
project.
names, Bekah?
No.
Would you like to be specific with it?
No.
I know.
Well,
I figured.
In terms of what you're talking about, Elric, and maybe somebody listening can actually confirm this, but like Fulci, I think right before he passed away, like last year, his last year of his life, he came out to New York during some big snowstorm for a Fangoria Weekend of Horrors. It was like one of his appearances there.
I was the moderator at his panel.
Oh, were you really? And from what I remember reading about it is he was pretty overwhelmed by the amount of fans that came out for it. And I think it's interesting that somebody of Fulci's, stature, who's made all these films, didn't think anyone gave a damn, and then comes to New York and like there's tons of horror fans there, It
was amazing because the person that it was him, Argento, the guy who did the effects on Della Morte, whose name's escaping me, and Ruggiero Diodato, and so it was the four of them up there and me moderating. And their English was
Sergio Stivaletti by any chance?
Yes,
probably. Yeah,
I have his.
Because that would have been around the time that Fulci and Argento were supposed to be working on that movie together. Like, was it like Wax Mask or something?
I don't even remember the
Wax
name of
something.
it.
I think Sergio went on to direct it after Fulci died.
This would have been about 2008.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I remember at the time that, it was, there was a snowy, it was kind of icky in New York that weekend. And the guy who was supposed to be the translator didn't show up. So I was standing there with these like four Italian guys and I don't speak a word of Italian. And I jokingly said to the audience, does anyone speak Italian? And this guy raised his hand and there was like an Italian in the audience and he came up and he got to meet everybody and he translated the entire thing and was
cool.
so excited.
No,
so.
I remember Fulci died in 96.
So this would have been, this would have had to have been before that then. So way before.
Yeah, no, it was, I know who you're talking about. There was four Italian guys that kind of toured together.
It was Diodato,
Lamberto
Argento.
Bava was
Lamberto Bava for sure.
Maybe he was the fourth.
Yeah, but Bava, I think Dario was part of some of it. But no, Fulci died back in the mid-90s. So that's how far back it's going because again, the Weekend of Horrors was a big deal for horror fans, but like conventions were not what they are now.
Yeah.
Back when he made this appearance. So,
I think in Chicago, the year before I moved out here, their Weekend of Horror, which I think was a Fangoria thing.
Was that one?
That's the
Ruggiero
one, was there because I talked to him for a long time.
Yeah.
Lamberto was there. I don't know who. George Romero was there.
Sergio, the effects guy.
Yeah, it could have been.
Well,
and one other guy. I can't remember who though.
Yeah, I know that there were four guys.
Around that time or a little bit after, there was like some cult horror convention in Tarrytown, New York. That a lot of these guys were at. So that might have been around the same time if they were doing the convention circuit. Back then, there were really only two horror conventions. It was Fango and Chiller Theater. That was it.
Yeah.
Those were the only two that existed. There was nothing in the Midwest. You either went to one in New York or LA, and that was it. And the New York one, also Secaucus, New Jersey. That's what Chiller Theater was.
Beautiful downtown Secaucus.
It's close to New York.
It was a lot cheaper than when we
in
started doing it in the actual Javits Center of New York. Those ones weren't so good. I liked the Secaucus area better.
And back then it was a lot easier to get around because it wasn't as popular as it is now. But also now when you go to Chiller, it's more like a pop culture convention.
Yeah.
But I remember going to Chiller and meeting people like Paul Naschy. And there was no one in line to see Paul Naschy.
Yeah.
And this guy is like a treasure. He's a horror icon overseas.
I still have your tapes of his film.
Yep.
And nobody was there, and he didn't speak very good English, and but he had I think his son was with him, and I was really nervous to talk to him because it was a big deal, and I just it goes along with this whole thing where it's people aren't really as respected or but I wish he could have seen a bigger crowd. I wish he could have gotten that Fulci vibe. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these guys, I've seen Diodato at conventions where nobody was around him, and I just don't understand it. It just doesn't. But even Argento at the last Fango Weekend of Horrors in LA, he was kind of just roaming around. Nobody was really bothering him.
Yeah, I heard they got Argento. I can't remember which convention it was. I think it was in the East Coast where Argento was there recently. And he did. He doesn't do a lot, but he does
Shock
a few.
and Rock a couple of years ago.
I heard that he had no line, but one of the girls from Rob Zombie's Halloween had this huge line. And it was kind of this is horror fans today. They don't appreciate that Dario is right here.
That's where it is.
Yeah. Well,
I remember at the same Chicago when I went in, there's all these lines for Romero, and I get to the corner, and Bill Moseley's in the middle, and he has a pretty healthy line, and then wedged in the corner where no one can even see this guy. It was Herschel Gordon Lewis, and he's such a tall guy, and he's just sitting in the corner. And I sat down, and I'm thinking to myself, when am I going to get to talk to Herschel? Before I do shows like this, and I just sat there, and we talked for 2 hours and mostly about business, like nothing I'm interested. He just started telling me about business ideas and, business models of making movies. And it was kind of fascinating. It was more like talking to a really good realtor.
Yeah.
But I was also kind of blown away going, oh my God, I just spent 2 hours talking to this guy and no one was there. I'm not like, I don't know if anyone talked to him that day.
I had that.
It was very weird.
At the Fango show that we did in Vegas, we had Ted Mickles there. And no one was talking to him. And I was just like, holy crap, this is amazing. And so, I went over and talked to him.
He is pretty interesting. He's a good interview.
Time. He was awesome.
See, that becomes our advantage, though. The people
it totally is.
It's like we get to take advantage
I always took
of
those opportunities. I remember one year at Chiller Theater, I was hanging out with, it was at the Something Weird video table. It was David Friedman and Russ Meyer were just hanging out there.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember, I got my poster signed and then I just kind of like pulled
Which
up
one?
A chair. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill.
Nice. Do you still have it?
I do, yes.
I have that signed by Tara Santana.
I have it signed by her as well.
How much?
Nice.
Just
How much to
on
sell
air?
it for?
I'll
It's
take
actually
it
got water stains on it. It's not in great shape.
Doesn't matter.
We'll talk after the show.
Big
Maybe
fan.
I'll.
Man,
I'm a big fan.
My Tara Santana one's in the garage. I should bring that in.
I have a picture of Russ Meyer without a mustache hanging on jump cut wall, and I believe I'm the only place on earth, probably with a Russ Meyer picture without a mustache hanging on the wall.
You still owe me a free coffee, by the way. The day that Elric
too, I think.
opened,
Oh, that's
he
true.
showed
I will
me
give her
this picture
credit for
on
that.
the wall, and he says, "No one who's come in yet knows who this is. I'll buy you a free coffee if you know
Sure.
who this is." And I looked right at it, and I was like, "That's a 20-something Herschel Gordon Lewis."
No, he was probably like 40, but he did look
He was
so
young.
young.
He was super
and it's
young
a
in
giant
it.
camera. And I've even had, I think even like maybe even Joe Dante had no idea. There's been a lot of people who've come in. I've been like, "Do you know who that is?" That and Russ Meyer without a mustache throw people because if you're used to how someone looks, but she just blinked. So I will give you massive credit on that,
Thank
even
you.
though you get most stuff wrong.
Oh, to hell with you.
That was pretty good though. But yeah, I mean, conventions it is pretty phenomenal. I mean, the thing about Lamberto, I think Lamberto Bava is an interesting filmmaker. We recently showed Shock at Jump Cut, and it really was a much more fascinating film than I remembered it to be. And then his first film, Macabre, is a very interesting film. They're weird films.
Wait,
I mean,
did he co-direct Shock with his father?
yes.
Was there, because
I
they
think
both get
it was
credit
his
on
dad's
it, right?
final. It was his dad's final movie. So if it was just straight in a book, it'd probably just say him. But Mario, for all intents, probably did more of it.
Right, and then
So,
Lamberto finished it.
It's kind of
I mean, I actually like Lamberto's stuff. I like the first Demons. Macabre is what I
It's
remember
interesting.
about
I mean,
it is it's got an insane ending.
I mean,
You
the
will never
insane
see
premise.
coming. It's an
There's
insane premise, which is what was it like? It's like
the head of the husband is in the fridge.
yes.
The weird thing about Italian
Isn't
cinema,
there like a blind person in
Yeah.
there?
Which is the cover of the VHS tape. Like
Yeah.
you saw, that was the cover, is the wife
head.
standing there with the head of the husband
Right.
in the fridge.
But this brings up another weird thing about Italian cinema that no other cinema I think does this in the world, which is they set their movies in America or in London, and it just or like The Beyond. People forget The Beyond set in fucking New Orleans.
Yeah.
Like that is not something you remember when you think about that movie, and you're like, New Orleans, really? And it's the same. I think this is set in New Orleans too. I think that one, the
You're right,
Macabre,
yeah.
is set in New Orleans, and that always throws me. I don't want that. Like when I watch their movies, I just want it to be set in Milan. Like I love Bird with the Crystal Plumage is one of the ones that I think ages the best. I don't know, of all the giallos, whenever I've seen that film, I'm always like, wow, this is a really just well-made movie, and it feels very. I don't know if that's in Milan or if it's in London.
Because it's like the most mainstream and less artsy out of all of them. It's
Probably.
not like a lot of weird shots and
and it has an Ennio Morricone soundtrack, so it's a little.
Yeah.
we're used to that.
It's
more
a little
than-
more accessible, I think.
It's not Goblin coming
On
in
the,
and
on the
tearing it up.
location note, I always liked I can never say this correctly. Anthropophagus.
I've never seen that one. I've always seen the title, and I should see that
and
film.
the box.
It's actually
never seen
set where it's filmed.
Okay.
And so it's supposed to be, kind of, all these crazy islands around Italy. It's these Mediterranean islands, not unlike the Odyssey. And so, they're traveling to these crazy islands to try to find
that's
somebody. And then they happen upon this cannibal. But I love
I've seen
it because
Antonioni's version of that same movie. The same premise. Just
a lot
islands.
of it kind of functions as a travelogue because you're looking at kind of these beautiful locales in this area.
Like
and,
Shockwaves, remember?
Yeah,
Shockwaves will sit on the
much so.
boat and beautiful Florida.
I mean, Zombie has some elements of
It
that
does.
where, it's supposed to be the Caribbean. So here's like 20 minutes while we're on a boat looking at
Fulci
villages
travelogue.
and things like
Even
that.
stuff like
So-
Dr. Butcher MD and stuff like that. They always took advantage of their locations and not Italian, but Roland was famous for that. I mean, just like the locations were a character in all
Oh,
of
the
his
slaughterhouse
movies.
in one of them. Where one of Lips of Blood.
Lips of
maybe?
Blood, I think.
It's gorgeous. It has like these flashbacks that are just stunning. But I remember these real locations that you can't replace. It's great to get out, and it's maybe by accentuating these real life places, they're able to set themselves apart from a studio system or what Hammer was doing in set locations.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
Because I think that really works. I mean, then a lot of them are like about college campuses or hippie cults or weird shit like that.
Yeah, but going back to Lamberto Bava, I like a lot of his stuff actually, and he's not as accomplished a filmmaker as his father is, granted, but a lot of his movies are fun. And there's one that he did, I think it was a little later in his career, it was called it was called A Blade in the Dark.
Blade in the Dark. I was going to mention that.
I think that's his best film too,
which is really good.
With the little blonde boy who has to run down after the ball.
Yeah,
that opening scene is one of my favorites in any Italian horror movie.
Was that his first feature?
No, it's after.
For some reason, I thought
Macabre
that
was the first.
That's right. You're right.
On his own.
And I think it's one of his best films. It's a really, really good film. And if he could have continued on making movies like that, I feel like he was onto something.
Yeah. Side note about that, I remember. I think Anchor Bay was the one that put out a double feature of A Blade in the Dark with Macabre, which is how I saw both movies. The opening sequence of Blade in the Dark, which is one of my favorites, the little blonde kid runs down to grab the ball in the basement. It's like the typical thing. That little kid was Giovanni Frezza, who was also in House by the Cemetery.
Yeah.
He's the notorious blonde boy that's dubbed the entire time.
No, I mean, he's recognizable in quite a few of them. I think he was also in The Fifth Chord or something. There's one of those.
Yeah, he also did Manhattan Baby, which that one I've never seen before. But he's in that apparently.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But again, I guess it goes back to what you were saying before, Elric. It's interesting how both behind the camera and in front of the camera, they've all kind of used a lot of the same people and kind of were working on each other's
which makes
films
sense.
and stuff.
I think at that same convention, I did a little video and I asked all the directors the first film. No, that was at Monsterpalooza a couple years ago. The first film that scared them. I think I've shared it once before. I'll share it again. And Lamberto's was, if you've never seen it, I only bring it up because it's a really great film, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's also a genesis of where giallo came from, which is called The Spiral Staircase. It's an American film. I think there's two versions, like two different remakes, but there's one in probably the 40s that was it's all expressionist lighting. It's beautiful, and it's a really spooky movie. And he was like, these films scare me first time. And that's all I could get from him. And I was like, okay, thanks, Lamberto. But, and I think Blade in the Dark has a bit of that. Yeah. It has a bit of that, the accentuated lighting, and I had forgotten about that film until you brought that up just now. So maybe I need to relook at Lamberto as his own man.
I would actually like to rewatch that movie soon.
Yeah, I'd watch that.
Blade in the Dark kind of brings up another weird thing about Italian cinema in general. Is like I always love how well respected artists and musicians and these
You're
are
right.
These
it's
are
very
jobs,
counterculture.
These are jobs as a kid that I was told you will never be able to do.
Right.
You can't be a successful composer or whatever it is, and yet it is so.
David Hemming's a pianist.
Yeah, it's just second nature. It's like, oh, I'm a famous pianist, and you're like, really? Oh, wow, that's the premise. That's what I'm following in this Italian movie. So I always thought that was kind of interesting about Italian cinema is how well regarded the arts are.
I mean, there are weird themes to them. I think that thing about animal titles to this day I couldn't, or animal and insects. I'm like, I have no, and numbers, right? Obviously numbers, the 7 something or whatever. But the animal thing, I've never understood that. That's the I wondered if it had something to do with their love of Poe. And I just don't know. I mean,
give an example.
Cat o' Nine Tails.
Oh,
I mean, literally all their
plumage.
titles. The scorpion with the something tail, the belly of the black tarantula.
It's
all animals. I mean, really, it mostly is.
You're right.
I have never heard anyone
that.
tell me why that is. I know they're based on the Mandadori books. There was the yellow books. I think there was a company called Mandadori Gialli.
Yeah.
And I bought a couple of. You can go on eBay and you can sometimes get one cheap, and they're really cool to have. You can't read them because they're in Italy. But it's literally, it's interesting that it just comes from that word yellow. But there's certain patterns. Some of the things like the gloves and the kids in danger, that makes sense on a stylistic level. Like Amer, the new film, from a couple years ago, Amer is just playing off those tropes and making not so much a film as some sort of homage. But what did you think about that? Did you enjoy watching that, or?
Yeah, and what was it, the second one that they did?
I haven't seen that one, but I really liked the first.
I can't remember the title.
The Strange Body of Your Tears
yes.
in a locker room with small glass balls.
Visually they're interesting, but I think it speaks to what you were talking about earlier, where you when you talk about the more adult gialli films that were more about the characters and the sexual tension and all this other stuff. That's what they're kind of playing off of. I think there's more mature themes with the visuals, and they're interesting films. I think that I enjoy watching them, but I think that they make about as much sense as the films that they're kind of taking those ideas from.
But there's definitely I remember seeing Amer in the theater and thinking, if this was playing in an art gallery right now, if I walked past this, it'd be the best piece of art I would have seen that year. But in a movie theater, it doesn't quite satisfy.
It's hard, and I can't take a conversation with anybody seriously when they're trying to really kind of like explain to me what it means, or where. And it's like you're just really reaching. It's like I get a lot of what they're saying, but the truth of the matter is, it's really more of like a weird piece of performance art than anything else.
It's more of the love to an ode to something. Sure. I haven't seen the new one, so I don't know if that's the same trope.
I didn't want to see it. I don't know.
I want to. I'm curious.
I'm supposed to watch it this weekend at Colorado. It's Strange Color of Your Body's Tears.
Yeah.
And we had Stacy review it for us, and she loved it. She thought it was amazing.
Yeah, but that's kind of her
her
wheelhouse,
forte.
Yeah, I want to say that I saw it at Fantastic Fest. I can't remember. I think it shares a lot in common with like Inferno. I would say that's the closest.
Yeah, Inferno is like when you go pure non-narrative, pure visual.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful movies ever made, but I couldn't tell you what it was about like, for the life of me. But
she had to get that key really bad.
Yeah, she really needs that key. It's one of the most beautifully shot movies. Every single shot in that movie counts. Every single shot was thought of. Like it's just like nothing's by accident.
It seems to be like the most successful ones that really last are the ones that are they almost go that far, but then they also find a way. Like I think Suspiria still does get across its story pretty well.
Sure.
But it goes all out with the visuals. There's another one, Pupi Avati, the house with the laughing windows.
That's on my list. That's one of my deep cuts.
I think that's just like maybe one of the best of the genre because
it
reminds
favorite.
me more of Don't Look Now.
Yeah, it's not as stylized. Yeah, it takes its story a little more seriously.
Yeah, I love that one just because for me it was completely different from all of the others. I mean, like the slasher element of giallo, somebody's hunting models. I mean, the fashion element.
It takes it away from that world.
It was all overdone by the time I got to House with Laughing Windows. And when I saw it, and it's completely different. It's a guy who's restoring a mural in a church, and people around him keep dying, and he's gradually uncovering clues in the mural,
which is a big difference. I think.
And and that's it. It's this very isolated environment, and he's surrounded by nuns, which in general I find creepy and intriguing. And so that one was from 1976 because we were kind of getting like I think that was more of the tail end.
Yeah, I think 78 was where. When's Della Morte? 80.
90s, early 90s.
Early 90s. So
that's, I guess,
like 94
down,
maybe.
Interesting, yeah.
Is House with the Laughing Windows, is that considered a giallo?
I don't know because it still has the black gloved unknown killer in it, but at the same time, it doesn't have any other elements other than being Italian.
I would say it would comfortably just be called a great Italian horror film. Without necessarily, but I think a lot of those films have shades of these things, and they have shades of the police. What's the subgenre called? Their inspection films.
Polizia Tecce.
They have a lot of them have shades of that. Like the Franco Nero one, I always talk about loving. The Fifth Chord, which is just this like I think it talked about when Lustig was here. It's this it's just gorgeous. Like everyone should see this movie. I would say it has a little bit of giallo, but it probably more towards that police inspection. But it's like shot by the guy who shot Apocalypse Now. It's got Ennio Morricone score, and Franco Nero's never looked better. A lot of J&B.
One of the other deep cuts that I had on here, along with House of Laughing Windows, is one that I actually wrote up on FearNet, In the Folds of the Flesh. Is totally just this whacked out film. The plot is so kind of batshit all over the place. I can't even really describe it other than it's like a dysfunctional family trying to hide the daughter's murders by burying them in the garden or covering up with acid. And I absolutely love that film. It's one that I think is absolutely beautiful, but I have no idea what it's about.
Which leads us to...
real quickly, going back to Pupi Avati with... he made a movie called Zeter, which is really good too.
Oh, right. Yeah. I've never seen Zeter, and I've always heard about it. Is it black and white, the cover?
I don't...
I think maybe the cover image. It might not even be the movie.
Honestly, it's been so long since I've seen it, but it's one that I definitely, now that I'm thinking about him more, I have to revisit it because I remember seeing it like 20 years ago and really liking it.
And is that a zombie film?
I don't think so, no. Okay. It's like this guy buys like a typewriter secondhand, and then he's able to read something on the ribbon from like someone else that used it, and he goes to sort of try to find out like who owned the typewriter. Oh. It's very spooky.
And a bit Ninth Gatey there.
Yeah, it's something that, it's one that I hadn't thought about the House of Laughing Windows for so long, and then when you mentioned his name, I had to like bring that movie up and find that other movie that I remember that I saw that he did. But it's one that I remember really enjoying.
I'd love to see a chronological history of all these guys and who was making films when and who helped who was kind of like, mainstream in Italy because they're working at, say, Sunset Quinqueta or something, and who was just totally outside, like, is it Diodato or some of the, not Diodato.
Joe D'Amato.
Yeah, people like that who are working and making the more grotesque
Joe D'Amato's stuff, but I
haven't seen a lot of it.
He did a lot of like really fun stuff, like Witchery. I always thought was a lot of fun, which was his one that he did with Linda Blair and David Hasselhoff and on an island, and And it was about it being, possessed by witches. But then at the end, Linda Blair shows up in her like old exorcist garb with her hair done out in the nightgown and everything. But she's pregnant and it's crazy.
But he seems like a real indie guy, right? He seems like a guy who's just making them on his own.
He was definitely more indie than the other. He was more prodigious, I'd say, because like the other ones might come up with like a film every 2 years. He had like 10 before you could blink. Plus he was doing...
he was in the adult industry a lot too.
Yeah, he was doing a lot of porn. Like, and I actually have copies of most of them and I don't even know why, but like Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, Porno Holocaust, Papaya Love Goddess of the Cannibals, or something with that combination of words. So yeah, it's these weird little porn horror meshes, and the majority of them have the same setup where a group of businessmen travel to an exotic island. And usually they end up sleeping with people, but then one by one they all start getting picked off either by zombies or
and a lot of them had the adult scenes inserted afterwards, like Caligula style, so they were not even shot when they were doing those movies.
So you could use it two ways.
And there's one that I discussed at a convention once and people were confused by, where I think it's in Erotic Nights of the Living Dead. The guy has got the worst case of HPV ever in the history. Like his genitals are lumpy is the only way I can describe it. And you're just watching him have sex with people. So it's really
But if you're looking for a good one from D'Amato, he did one called Beyond the Darkness. That's actually really good.
Amazing.
It's probably his best film.
I have a copy
Beyond
of it. You're welcome to borrow
Beyond the
it.
Darkness.
Yeah.
It also goes on, it's like Buio Omega or something. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's got a great Goblin score.
Yeah.
Did he do a film with Klaus Kinski? Joe D'Amato? I feel like there's some... This might even be the... No, he's not in that film.
He's not in this one, no.
Can I steal your pen?
Yes, you did recommend it.
But it's very disturbing. It's, it kind of tries to do its own thing. So that's why it's kind of like refreshing. But I don't want to say too much about it because going in fresh for a film like that is really the best way to do it.
Oh, yeah, no, that sounds good. Who of the American... Like from what you've seen over the years... Which American directors do you think carried the most influence of some of this early Italian stuff and giallo and stuff? Like, do you see clear? I mean, there's people who talk about it. Like Eli Roth's going to go, "Oh, I'm influenced by Deodato or whatever." But do you see that more under the surface of any particular filmmaker?
Current filmmakers?
I mean, or even back when Carpenter people. Like, do you see it, or were they kind of doing their own thing? Were they in different? Like, were those because those films weren't really available? I don't even know if they were influenced.
I mean, I think a lot of filmmakers were probably influenced by them because they were seeing these movies. I mean, I think especially that crop of filmmakers from the 70s and 80s because, your Joe Dantes and your Steven Spielbergs.
Right. I'd even say like Bill Lustig.
Well, he makes sense.
Martin Scorsese, I'm sure. Like they were cinephiles. They liked movies and they probably were seeing these movies on 42nd Street or, trying to find, they were into that sort of movie, I'm sure. Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't think that there are any like overt similarities. I would say that, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I can't think of anything American that has like really like, especially with like Argento and Fulci. I feel like no one else really made movies like them for better or for worse.
Yeah, because we took the giallo films and turned them into our Americanized slasher films. And so, I mean, there's no one now that I think is doing slashers that I'd immediately point at and go, oh, nodding at giallos.
Right.
The only one, and it was only after you mentioned it, is Lords of Salem. Like Rob Zombie's got that's got a very Italian. I was thinking more Kubrick and stuff, but once you mentioned Fulci, I'm like, oh, that makes total sense.
Well, actually, off the top of my head, the only person who makes total sense, but I would never be able to tell if he was at the exact same time as De Palma. I'm sorry, just Dressed to Kill and shit. Of course,
sure.
Yeah.
Those things are almost the same, but I can't tell what the timeline on those would be. It seems like he had that operatic sense that he was drawn to, which is very Italian in the first place. It's interesting. There is another thing I like is some of the weird premises. I was thinking about the wackiest of all the premises, which is also kind of poish. It's not the best of the movies, but I thought it was one of the most interesting was the Short Night of the Glass Dolls, where he's a reporter and I just assumed he was dead because he's on a slab in front of a class, so you think he's dead, but he's narrating the movie and telling you like kind of like first, and you're going like, well, what's happened? And as it goes, of course, you realize he's somehow been drugged or something. He seems dead, but isn't dead, and he has to solve his own murder within the context of the movie, but being on a slab through flashbacks, of course, and understand. But it's so outrageous, but in the same token, it's really cool. It's like that's a fun idea for a movie. I don't remember it necessarily working completely, but you see things like Ryan Reynolds trapped in a box and buried or whatever, and I can see where some of those kind of concepts kind of come forward.
I always liked Bloody Pit of Horror. That was kind of my batshit one. You guys don't know that one?
It's a
guy.
Doesn't sound like a giallo. It's not giallo.
It's not true giallo. I think it's just an Italian film, but it's a guy who brings a whole bunch of people over to his house for the weekend, and then he thinks he's the Marquis de Sade, so he starts like torturing and killing them all. But the weird thing is, it's an Italian film, but he dresses up like a Mexican like luchador wrestler. So he's got this mask on, and then he's shirtless, and he's got these like skin tight little skivvies on, and so he's walking around like this luchador wrestler torturing these people.
I bet you it's a Mexican film that was dubbed into Italian to trick you into
Probably.
thinking it was a better film.
I'm looking it up now.
That'd be
I'm
awesome.
99% sure it's Italian.
I know it's not because it was a Spanish filmmaker, but I always throw pieces into this category because it just feels like it feels like an Italian film. It feels like a giallo film.
Yeah,
But
and they were probably cashing in on the. I bet it was made right when. One I saw maybe only a couple years ago, like later after I'd seen a lot of this. Because giallo was, I've told Rob this before, it's the only thing that I was ever moved to really want to make one of those documentaries, like the all-encompassing. And I remember we pitched to Dan Farrens, and he was just like, there's no market. You couldn't, with the amount of travel you'd have to do. And the main reason I'd want to do it is just because I don't know all the answers. Because I watch these movies and I see these connections. I'm like, I really want to meet the guys and go like, at the time, like did JMB just say, hey, here's some money, put our whiskey in your thing? Or is that just what Italians were drinking right then? There's so many weird connections about it that I think are really fascinating. And they're films that I feel like if you're a big horror film, and if you're someone listening to this show, you probably feel like you've seen it all. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of us feel that way with the American cinema. And I feel like when I suddenly open the Pandora box of Italian, I've never seen it all. I still haven't seen it all.
Giallo in
new
particular.
titles all the time coming out.
I'm passing around pictures of Bloody Pit of Horror just because it's pretty fucking crazy.
Well, Elric is
it's just too weird. It looks more Spanish though. Yeah.
As we found out on via Twitter.
What happened on Twitter?
Oh no, a writer. He's contributed to Fangoria before.
Derek Botello?
No, Callum Waddell.
Oh, somebody is making that film,
Caleb.
right?
He's making a giallo documentary, and I wish I could remember. He said it was going to be a
Part of
featurette
something.
for some. I think it's an Arrow release or some European release or something like that. I'll try to find out and post about it on our page.
Really, all you need to do is compile all of the interviews that people have done for all the the anchor band. Like Red Shirt Pictures probably did a bunch of them, and
it feels like they did, but I feel like you need someone who's the whole scope is to answer the whole thing.
Yeah,
I know it's impossible.
Well, you've got very specific questions.
I do have the
alcohol,
the animal title,
and
I have a lot of questions about Edvig Fennick. I have so many questions.
Some of these questions had to have been addressed, though. I mean,
I'm sure in some context somebody has.
But the
answers are out there, just like bits and pieces all over the place.
But it would be cool if his documentary then it saves me a trip to Italy,
right? Exactly.
Which I didn't want to take.
But I want to share. I'll share it on our page and with you guys. But the funniest thing on the internet is the giallo generator.
Oh yeah,
have you heard of this?
Yeah, I've used that.
No,
yeah.
what is this?
It's just. I gotta find the link again. Actually, you could just Google it. Just do giallo generator, and it's a page that you just keep refreshing. And essentially, it's a title and a plot synopsis. And the title pulls from X amount of words, and the plot synopsis pulls from X amount of words. So it's different every time. So if you hit refresh, it'll be like, the 7 eyes of the bloody cat. And then it'll be like a musician with black gloves and his nun mother. I
think we should generate one and make it into a short.
We should.
I like that idea.
You could. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Mine's always Don't Torture Spasmo. That'd be a great remake.
It's combining two movies.
I know. Spasmo is Spasmo is one of the ones I only saw recently. I think I was just going to say, and it's actually really entertaining. I think if no one's seen Spasmo is weird. And if you're a mannequin fetishist, I have a real thing for mannequin horror movies like Tourist Trap. Anytime a mannequin or a maniac, anytime mannequins are used as a major part of, and in this one they hang mannequins and they kind of are trying to be menacing. Spasmo is a weird movie with a great trailer. Spasmo.
I don't think I've ever seen Spasmo.
I think you like Spasmo. Spasmo is really
cool.
Watch
it.
Okay, here we go.
Might be Corbucci. I'm not sure. Sergio, yeah.
It's a new giallo generator.
Okay, we're gonna do one for Lawrence live.
That's so exciting.
This is gonna be his new Twitter handle if he's even on Twitter.
He is. He never uses it though.
Inactive.
So you just refresh this. So right now, for example, the title is "A Smoking Pistol Gleams in a Darkened Room," directed by Rogerio.
I love that name.
The plot is a playwright. A playwright who claims to be able to read people's minds disappears one day. His twin inadvertently picks up the one piece of evidence that will solve the disappearance. After discovering an old painting, she misleads the police in order to extract a brutal revenge of the criminal by herself. Okay.
Ooh.
So that's it. You can just refresh these and it just kind of mixes all the words
You know what
around.
we need to do? We need to try to find out whoever created that thing, have them on the show, because that's just crazy.
I just
Whoever spent
refreshed.
their
I'll
time
give you
to
one
do
more
that.
title. I'll give you two more titles. The next title is Three Dead on the Crystal Balcony.
Nice. Ooh, I like
Refresh
that.
it. The Baboon with Teeth of Glass.
See?
By
Animal
Franco
Animals.
Franco.
I wonder if the animal thing. Now I'm convinced it probably comes from Rue Morgue. It probably comes from that particular story by Poe. It probably
Really?
is. I mean, I think they have a lot of Poe and a lot of detective fiction running through. I wonder if that's the genesis. Who knows?
Well, the animal theme was kind of big in detective fiction
Right.
because, I mean, you're wearing a Maltese Falcon shirt
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
true.
So
Yeah.
I
The
don't
answer's
know.
right in front of us.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Why haven't you not been able to answer
The
this?
answer's on your chest.
I didn't realize the answer was on my chest all along, which is very much the ending. And I want to share this one thought. This is my closest I'll ever get to genius on the way here. I realized what giallo is. Okay, giallo is literally what would run through Hitchcock's mind, but he never made. I believe that giallo is like exactly what Hitchcock wanted to make in his brain and could physically not make those movies because he was working in a studio system and because he was, a repressed guy. I've read multiple biographies on Hitchcock and they're so dark, in terms of what his actual mind. He tried to make this one movie that looked like that. His closest is obviously the strangling one at the end. What's it called? Frenzy.
Frenzy.
It's very close to him going that, but even then he has to dial it back with this comics. I honestly believe that if he was watching giallo, those are the movies that actually would have been spinning in his head, but then he would give you something that's much more restrained and much more successful because of that, because there's more tension in the restraint. Whereas, and I was literally going, oh man, that's like, gee, I wish I was smarter and had a job. But I felt good about that one moment in my life where I made that connection. It's probably on a book somewhere. I probably
I
read
wish
it.
somebody was here to share it with
Yeah,
me.
I wish I had a podcast. But Hitchcock, and for anyone, I'm going to try to find that thing. I've mentioned it before about his film where he did try to go towards like nudity and 70s.
Yeah.
And somebody recently posted, I can't remember what website it was, but I'll find it, where you see outtakes and photos, and the studio just said no. They're like, no, we
Wow.
don't want to make that film.
Yeah.
And it was towards the end, and it looked pretty crazy for him, But anyway.
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe we've put too much weight on giallo and not enough on other. I mean, is there anything we're missing in other
I
Italian
got
horror?
him. The one thing I saw was Stage Fright this
Stage
week.
Fright's
Not
on
the
my
new
list.
one.
Well, we've been talking about
one's
that
from,
for
Stage Fright
long time.
That
Aquarius.
one's a little out of the kind of path with the rest because it's from
Totally.
1987, and by that time, kind of the giallo had run its course, and we were kind of seeing.
It feels
not
more
as
Friday
much.
the
It's
13th.
more,
than-
yeah, it's more slasher-esque, but I mean, it's just so freaking. I mean, again, it's got the the opera, the play that these Italian actors are putting on and all. What's
Escaped
this?
lunatic on the run.
Escaped Lunatic with the owl head, and it was funny. I was inspired to rewatch this because Ryan had talked about it on the Bloodcast a few weeks ago.
But we talked about it here for many times.
Yeah. But I
come up a
forgot.
lot.
He reminded me how it opens with it's not the killer yet, but the owl guy like comes jumping out on stage and dancing, and it's kind of
I
like
don't
it's kind of
remember
a rarity to see the killer of your film in the first 5 minutes running around a stage and like bouncing
Yeah, I
up
don't
and down.
remember that.
It
I found
happens
a-
in Stage Fright,
The
the
other
new
version.
one.
the new one.
The new one, okay. Yeah, it's just kind of funny that that's how that movie opens, and then that owl-faced killer will eventually.
It's got a great style to it. I mean, you could tell. I mean, he just definitely seems, and I having just seen the Sec pretty recently, it's like
Oh, right, yeah, I
you
wanna see
definitely
that.
see this really strong voice, and I wish he would have made wish he could have made more movies.
Stage Fright was his first, and then he did
Church.
the Church, right?
Which I liked. I mean, it was a little of a slow
It doesn't
burn,
go
but,
anywhere. It
yeah.
like builds strong, and you're like, oh, this is gonna have the best last 20 minutes, and then it ends, and you're like, oh,
yeah, I
it's
gotta
one of those
revisit
weird
that
movies.
one.
It's very stylish. It's I still don't understand. I should rewatch it. It was one of those movies I remember going, whoa, where'd the rest of it go?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking it was meant to be a part of a trilogy, part of.
Well, in certain areas, I think it was Demons 3, although it's nothing to
Right.
do with those. But
nowhere near as good as the real Demon 3. The Ogre.
oh, I haven't. Yeah,
Have you seen Demons 3, The Ogre?
I have not.
Your whole life is better for nothing. Demon 3, The Ogre. It was if you ask me top 10 worst films I've seen in my life, that would definitely be in my top 10, and most disappointing. Because of what I expect. It's nothing to do with the world at all.
Right.
There's no connection, nothing mentioned. It's just a
Oh, they were
castle.
just cashing in on,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, but there
It's
was
like Castle Freak or something.
like they're up to like Zombie 6 or 7, and like
Yeah.
none of them have anything to do with anything. I mean, Fulci's Zombie was called Zombie 2 at one point. It was supposed to be
Yeah.
a sequel to Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead. Yeah.
Witchery was actually originally Ghost House something. It was supposed to be the Ghost House series, which was supposed to, I think, be the Evil Dead. It linked to one of the original ones. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that one.
What do you guys think Argento's best film is, and not necessarily your favorite? Like, I mean, I change all the time. Recently, I've been like, Tenebre is a really well-made movie.
I really like Deep Red.
I would say Tenebre.
I think Tenebre. See, I think Deep Red's an amazing movie, but it's got so much fat to it too.
It's clunky. It's got,
but it's also got it's got some amazing stuff. But it's just it keeps going and going. Whereas Tenebre just is like this concise.
Yes.
Seeing it again when Goblin were here, I was like, it's probably one of the best soundtrack. I mean,
Best soundtrack.
I mean, Suspiria, I
revisit
still
that.
prefer personally to watch Suspiria because it's a fun film. But I think Tenebre is a really good movie.
Is it weird for me to say opera? Because I
Yes.
just revisited that. I mean, it's got
It's a beautifully made
so
film.
weird,
It's
Rob.
got some silly stuff, and the lead girl doesn't care that people around her are getting killed horribly. But that aside, I'm just impressed with the
very well made.
filmmaking. Yeah, that's what it is.
Opera is one of my least favorite Argentos. I think that it's one of his films that suffers from just having a lot of really great scenes, but nothing really holding it together. And there are some really great scenes. Like, every single one of his movies has that moment, and like that moment in like the opera house where the birds flying. It's just
Or
amazing.
her eyes, the image of her eyes being opened with the blade.
Yeah, classic scenes, but it's just really those scenes, and I feel like it's
As a
probably
whole.
one of the
There's an American
biggest
actor in there, right?
offenders.
A guy who I wish I had IMDb open. There's a guy in that film who's like one of those guys who was just like in mainstream American movies. As he's young, Williams. You talk amongst yourself. I'm going to solve this before this
while
show's
he's
over.
solving this, I'll say my standalone Italian film that doesn't really connect with anything else because it's questionably an Italian film, but it is Dark Waters, also known as Dead Waters from
yeah.
93, 94.
Mariano Baino.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love Mariano and I love this film. And
Great
even though
movie.
it was filmed in Russia, and I know that there's questions because it's got kind of a Russian crew, but it's definitely an Italian sensibility, and I loved it. It's a woman grown up now going to investigate this kind of isolated nun enclave that she thinks her mother lived at, and trying to figure out who her mother was there. But it's if you like Lovecraft, you'll like it. But it's just got a great Italian sensibility to it.
Yeah,
Got
it's
it.
a good
Beautiful, beautiful movie.
It's William McNamara. Do you remember that actor? Young.
one. Name sounds familiar.
He was in like Copycat and a whole bunch of stuff. But he was one of those like young American actors you've seen in a bunch of movies, and he was in opera. And I remember being a young person going, "Oh, weird! It's all these Italian." But then this one actor, and that's the other thing about those kind of films. They throw all sorts of international stars in the movie. They dub them all pretty much. That was the only thing I
John
did
Saxon,
like. John Saxon,
popping up in-
but he can speak Italian. I think he is fluent. And both, but I also that movie from last year that I wasn't as wild about as England was, where they said it was like their best film in years. The film with the little British guy Toby dubbing. It's like
the Siberian Sound, whatever.
Barbarian Sound
Barbarian
Sound
Studio.
Studio.
which
Yeah.
on the surface looked like a movie somebody made for me. Like I remember when I saw the trailer and I was like, "Oh, somebody made me a movie," and then
I
I
had the
watched it. And I was
same
like,
thought.
"I'm bored," and
had the same
didn't
thought.
care about Toby's. His character like really didn't care about him.
Yeah.
And I also felt like it was kind of missing the real fun.
Yeah.
The dubbing sessions were pretty cool, and you're like, "Oh, they're making Suspiria, probably."
Sure. Yeah,
it felt like they were
absolutely.
actually
Yeah.
making Suspiria, but there's something not there. But then in England, everyone was like, "This is the heralding the voice of the next great filmmaker." I think some of it's maybe cultural.
Yeah. Do you have any more deep cuts, Rebekah?
No, that's about it for my deep cuts that I had on here. Yeah, I'd say that's it.
Wow.
But you know what's the weird one that I found? When I was Googling, Italian horror films, Leviathan was on like every list. And that's
Why?
the weirdest one. Apparently it had like an Italian director and crew. But it
Leviathan,
was
the movie underwater.
like 1989.
Oh, that's
like,
George P. Cosmatos.
You're right, it is.
Yeah.
It's on so many lists as being like Italian horror, and I was so confused by it. So
You should write back to those things and say, motherfucker. I do have one more that you should maybe avoid: A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. It's got some.
Avoid?
It's got some amazing sequences, but man, for film classes, I would always, because it's so hard to find bad continuity in movies when you're teaching, and so I would Lizard in a Woman's Skin. I've used in more classes than any other movie. Like it's the Citizen Kane, or it's like that in The Room with Tommy
That's
Wiseau.
Fulci, right?
It's Fulci. It is Fulci.
It's Fulci.
It has some the surreal scenes where their woman would like say run through a train and they'll do a match cut and everyone's like kind of like zombies. Beautiful. But there's just dialogue scenes where a character is literally 2 meters away from a character. They turn and on the cut, they're right next to each other. Totally must be purposeful because, you just couldn't be that off. And there's like crazy dubbing. It's a British actor who was pretty popular, kind of like a Lee Marvin type of England for a while. I can't remember, is the lead detective. His name is blanking right now. And it's just one of those movies where it really makes not a lick of fucking sense. But it's, it's fun. You can watch any of them. I just remember that one was like wildly crazy how poorly some of it was put together.
I'm sorry, I just remembered one that I will throw out at you. There's actually two more that I will throw out that are kind of deep cuts. We were talking about Joe D'Amato. He has one called Horrible, which is some of his films are really clunky. That's probably the one that I think is probably his best if I had to pick one. I think it's also called Absurd, depending on where you are. And then one of my absolutely favorite nunsploitation films, Flavia the Heretic, is Italian. I swear, it's great. It is one of the best nunsploitation films. And I like it because whereas most of the nunsploitation fare had kind of the same plot where it was like, it was set in a convent and one nun decided to get more rendy than the other. So there's always a lesbian scene. She always sleeps with a boy from the neighboring town. And then she always flogs herself because she feels bad about what she's done. And then, flames and things like that. But this one is completely different because she doesn't like the Christian religion because it is very male heavy and doesn't give room for women to have a place. And so then she ends up leaving and becoming a Muslim and discovers that they're just as bad. And so it's wonderful.
What is it with you and nuns, though? I want to know.
Like, that's just always been kind of a focal point of my research.
Did you go to Catholic school?
I didn't. I've never even been to church.
Did you want to go to Catholic school?
No, my parents were Methodist for about the first 4 years of my life, and then that was it. So I grew up kind of devoid of religion, but nuns for me, I've always been just fascinated with the way they were presented in movies. And I don't even know why that is.
Well, nunsploitation is a pretty prevalent, category in that period, that time period from like the 70s into the little bit in the 80s. I mean, it was like women in prison.
Can you answer why?
No, it's like
besides Catholic school.
I can answer why it was prevalent then, but why am I amused by it or interested in it? It started I was probably first year of college. I saw this movie. It was Japanese called School of the Holy Beast.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And I absolutely loved it. And then from there, I just started watching nun films. And
you ever see Black Narcissus?
No,
famous Michael Powell, the British one. Okay, that's all nuns, and it's actually got a horror element to it. It's a Criterion.
Oh yeah,
it's one of those films that on the surface it's just this kind of like very, very British and very art house, and then like halfway through, one of the characters loses her mind, and this nunnery and starts to do a couple bad things, but she looks almost possessed. It's not a straight possession film, but it's an interesting film. But
I was really amused by the backstory of it because a lot of these nun goes crazy stories had been circling around the areas surrounding the Vatican. That's where you see the majority of the nun films coming out of, or where people are like pressed up against the Vatican, like Spain and Italy, and then a couple out of Japan. But I think that's because we had missionaries traveling through. But with those neighboring countries, you see this kind of rebelling against it, but it wasn't just introduced in the 70s. You'd been having these stories of like the Nun of Monza story had been around for, centuries at that time. So it was it had an interesting folklore thing.
Can nuns carry out an exorcism, or is it only male priests?
Well, there actually is, wait, that is a different
like I'm
one.
treating like she's a special guest who's going to answer me all, just like you're a special guest to answer all my Italian questions.
Tell her how wrong she is.
I don't think I've seen, and I could be wrong, I'm going to have to go back through all my nun repertoire.
I don't think anyone's made that movie, but that'd be a cool movie, right? Exorcism for the nuns, the devils.
There is an Italian film called The Sexorcist. That's kind of fun.
But I wonder, because Catholicism often feels, very male hierarchy, I wondered if they would even have that power.
See, almost all of the nunsploitation fare.
No, I'm genuinely interested, but also wasting your time.
I can tell.
Save it for the nunsploitation episode.
Okay. You tell me afterwards. But actually, let's make that a question for a giveaway. That if you can answer on a page, if nuns can perform exorcisms,
Give us a
it better be a
title.
real answer, she will give you the first 30 pages of her PhD dissertation ahead of print.
You can proofread it for me.
If she's written that much yet. I don't know if she started.
I'm on page 100.
Okay, there you go.
Right.
Anyway.
One more title before we wrap up here. And it goes into that subcategory of Polizia Tece, which I like. I don't know.
They're interesting.
Weird things. Ruggero Deodato, the director of Cannibal Holocaust. I have to give credit to my friend Zane Grant for recommending this movie. He did a film called Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man.
I saw that on Netflix. I haven't watched it, but they have it on streaming. Yeah,
you should have.
Franco Neri's in that too, I think, right?
I don't know about that, but the first 5 minutes is so unbelievable. It's one of these like hyper violent, like you could see like Tarantino probably loves this movie. Right. It's just so out of control, hyper violent. Like it opens with a purse snatching of a guy a guy on a motorcycle tries to snatch a purse from a woman who, by the way, refuses to let go of her thing. Like, she could easily just let go at some point, but she doesn't, and they drag her into a fire hydrant, so she hits her head and dies. Huh. And then two really violent cops that are kind of homoerotic are on a bike and chase these two guys down. And there's a blind man crossing the street at one point, and you feel like something horrible is going to happen, and it does. It's pretty amazing. It's just like one of the most unbelievable, over-the-top, violent Italian movies ever. I would recommend actually watching it English dubbed because it's far funnier hearing these guys with fake English, voices over everything. So
yeah, I don't know many. I haven't seen many from that subgenre, but they sound exciting.
I know there was also an adaptation, I'm looking for it now, of the story Color Out of Space that came out a couple of years ago from an Italian filmmaker. Debbie Rochon was in it. And I remember really liking that one. I got to look it up. But yeah.
It was an adaptation of what?
Color Out of Space, an H.P. Lovecraft story.
I mean, that's something we should, it is, before we wrap, mention just quickly is like what's happened to the Italian horror scene and what happened at the time. Was it just that, do you know much about how things kind of changed? I mean, is there an Italian horror scene now at all? I mean, because we keep seeing these French directors with kind of French extremism is breaking through. I can't think of the last time a new Italian director.
Yeah, well, I don't think that there
Tolpo
really is.
was 2012, but no one gets to see it.
Yeah, no one's heard of that. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting how the wave South Korea, seems to be hitting its stride.
It's weird. I just feel like a lot of those filmmakers, for whatever reason, I guess the business had changed. Because you were saying how, I'm pointing at Lawrence, about that project that Argento was supposed to do with, was it Fulci?
Fulci, yeah. Wax Mask it was.
Yeah, and then and then Fulci died and didn't get to do it or whatever. But even since then, I know those guys, when they were touring, doing the Fango stuff, they were all trying to do either an anthology film or something, and it just seems like
and there is
it's a tough gamble to finance that kind of thing now.
There is still some stuff going on, because I posted it up on Twitter a couple of weeks ago where I got a press release that said Fulci starts production on new movie, and I posted up kind of snarkily, well, man, I hope they know that he's been dead for a couple decades.
He has a great Twitter account, by the way. It's really funny.
Then once I started reading the press release, it was I don't want to say his son, it was his brother who was manning this one, and so they're still kicking.
Interesting.
So they weren't lying. Fulci really is going to be.
He is got a film.
Actually, what year
Fulci will be making a movie?
But his brother worked with him on some of the other stuff.
Oh, really? So. Bob Fulci. I don't know. That's what all brothers are called.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember what year Cat in the Brain was? Because that seems to be another bullet in the end of something. It feels like once you go satirical. It feels like to me the end of a cycle of a director ending his own cycle. I couldn't
tell if that was satirical or not, or
it
if
had
not
to
just
be.
meta and self-aware. But he's wearing that damn Elmer Fudd
He looks like Elmer Fudd. It's
so
amazing.
I mean, he has to know.
And the gore scenes are just kind of plugged in to shock just for the sake. It's a very interesting movie.
I don't know. It's one of these.
I think
films
that was just how he dressed, though.
Yeah, I always looked at that.
I think
film.
That would be amazing if he dressed like that.
Because Cult Collectibles did a bobblehead of Fulci, and he's wearing that hat.
But I think it was a Cat in the Brain collectible.
Was it?
Yeah, I think it's called Cat in the Brain collectible.
For some reason, I feel like that was just him.
It'd be amazing if he did, because that
was his
very
style.
bizarre.
I wrote about that film in Gore Zone, and I talked about how it's one of these films that I look at and I assume that he had to be aware of the joke and that he was making it as a joke because it's so satirical. But then I watch it and I question that. For him, this may have been his best film he's ever done because it's so mental. And even though it's kind of like a Fulci clip show, it's all about him being the auteur and crossing the line into reality.
Yeah, no, it's a very strange.
It's bizarre.
Strange film. I just think the cool thing about movies is that you can make The Beyond, and then you can make Cat in the Brain, and you can be the same human and be like, yeah, they're both really good, they're both equal, and you're like, no, they're not.
But I mean, and that's evident more so in a lot of these Italian directors than in a lot of other directors, and and those Italian films in general, because you had really great straightforward horror films, you had these really weird stylistic art films. And then you had the cash-ins where they were just trying to rip off American horror films.
Yeah, and it feels like the best ones are a mixture of all three.
Yeah.
It feels like the ones that really work are
they all have
crazy,
their merits.
Hybrid, yeah. I think I guess one of the questions is why is Argento so popular? I mean, he's easily the most popular of all these filmmakers in America, especially in Europe.
For sure.
But what is it about his work that spoke to Americans, I guess? I don't really know. I mean, the boldness maybe of visual storytelling.
I'd say it was
and
the
color.
visuals.
because I hadn't seen that before.
That was something that we definitely weren't getting over here at the time. I mean, while America was submerged in this kind of gritty aesthetic of grindhouse films, we're seeing Argento make this kind of refined color palette where everything is planned out and taking the blood out of, kind of what I'll call like a documentary news aesthetic, which is how it usually looked in most grindhouse films, to this like hypercolored point where it looked like poster paint. I think that is what
it's true. Like we were making like cheap indie looking movie, like Friday the 13th. This looks like an indie or something, or Texas Chainsaw. Even though it's beautiful, it does feel like you just went out and made it.
They were all shot hoping for realism. If you look at something like Last House on the Left, I mean, that's what they're aiming at is realism. So everything's kind of muted and toned down to make it look more real.
Except
and then
David Hess, who you can't tone down.
And then the Italians,
Keystone Cops.
Their blood's bright orange and is just as important vividly and visually as everything else on screen. So it's
I think Argento, it's style, because I remember I had a conversation with Tom Holland. We were talking about Argento stuff. And he was just describing to me the first time he saw Suspiria, and he's like, you just had never seen anything like it. So whether you are a fan or director yourself, it's just like something like that just stands out. And I think from my perspective, it's style. Like that stands out from all the other Italian horror movies.
And I think that's why there was an audience for it when it first came out. And that's why there was an audience for it when Anchor Bay first started releasing them on DVD in the late 90s, early 2000s, because it wasn't a great time for horror films in the United States. So we really were kind of looking for something different. And I think that it was the right time in both of those, times. It just fit, and people were looking for it.
Yeah. I forgot that there not much was going on theatrically in horror here in America in the late 90s when DVD was starting to take off. So
it was a great time to rediscover a lot of those movies. I think that's why Anchor Bay was so successful with it early on, was because people were looking for something different, something fresh, even if it was a movie that was 20 years old.
And you know how you were talking about how you always show Woman in Lizard Skin when you were teaching? Suspiria was my go-to film, and it was also the most memorable for me because the last class I taught was I was teaching a horror history class in Virginia. And I started the class on the very first day I showed Suspiria, and one of my kids sitting in the front row, I didn't know he was epileptic, went into full convulsions.
Oh, boy.
And it was the scariest moment.
I wonder what...
It was the opening thing. And I couldn't tell if it was visual or noise, and he never came back to my class.
The soundtrack has a rhythmic...
Because it was that bump, 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 bump. And that's what I thought it was, but at the same time, it could have been the flashing and all the bright colors. I mean, it's the opening scene where she's like dangling through. But it was like right on cue, where right as soon as she fell through the glass, immediately started having the convulsions. So yeah, that was...
Have you guys ever been? How that's always on teasers for movies, like VHS. Oh, somebody passed out. Have you ever been in a theater ever in your whole life where something has happened?
Only Blair Witch.
Blair Witch.
Yeah.
It was a shaky cam.
I had when I saw crap. Now I can't even remember the name of the film. So go on.
I don't know. I'm the one. I was dancing in the dark. I worked at a theater. It wasn't a horror film, but I worked in this old man goes, I'm gonna die. I mean, then he went and puked in the bathroom because of the handheld camera. He couldn't handle it. But that wasn't. I look back at newsreel stuff of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first screening. You have this giant line, or Exorcist, and there's a giant line of people who don't know what they're about to watch.
Yeah,
they have no idea how crazy and how intense that movie is going to be. And then you'll see, you see these ambulances parked outside. I don't know if that was mostly news, like a way to kind of drum up a story, or if that was really just because they had less access to crazy shit back then.
Yeah.
And now we're so desensitized to an extent,
The title I was trying to remember was one that I actually talked about last time, defending it as a horror film, was Requiem for a Dream. I had somebody who walked out of it dry heaving during it. So.
Yeah, I can see that. But I've never had one of those ones where somebody's just flat out, because every Sundance somebody says that, right? They're like, it's usually Simon Barrett.
Passed out.
Will tweet. He'll be like, oh, somebody passed out.
I saw people walk out because of questionable content or something like that. But there was something that we were at recently where somebody ushered her two girls out as soon as it started. I don't remember what it was.
I do remember going to see Critters 2 when I was a kid and being the only person in the theater.
And now it's coming back this week.
Friday
what a great timing.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go. That's going to be fun.
Friday at midnight?
Yeah, man.
There's something happening before that I can't
don't have
talk
to
about.
get up at 6 anymore.
Well, you're saying you're coming to my place for a secret thing that I can't talk about.
And you're coming with me to Critters 2.
Maybe if I...
Is the secret thing on Sunday?
Unfortunately, you're going to miss it. Something that just came up today that's going to play this Friday.
Don't talk about this on air. That's just not fair.
I can't. Well,
okay. Thank you so much to our guest, Lawrence Raffel.
Thank you for having me.
Formerly of FEARNET.
And futurely of the future.
Formerly
we wish you all good luck into the new world.
Thank you.
When you relaunch
I
Monsters
feel like
of
there's
Play,
like a beam that's going to come
And
down.
you did a great job. A lot of us are big
planet.
fans of the content of FearNet, and we
Yes.
hope it stays up. And I know no
Appreciate
one knows
that.
the future, but that's the one place you always knew you could, especially just review content. I like people making lists, people talking about movies they love. Just
Funky
a
bugs.
lot of different
I
stuff.
loved the bug stuff. It
Yeah.
was great. So
thank
you
you,
know.
Lawrence.
Thank
He
you,
always gave
Lawrence.
us, he always gave us a really good chance to do different stuff on FearNet.
Yeah.
I don't think you've ever any crazy pitch. I don't think Lawrence ever turned down any article idea. Unless
really?
you could think of something, but I'm pretty
Probably
sure.
not from you. I think there are a couple that I
A
turned
lot of
down.
Weinberg
Right.
ones in the can.
you took
Well,
every title I
look.
threw at you, including like Mermaid in a Manhole, and I was like,
well, those are all good titles. And the truth of the matter is, especially with the web, you could be so experimental with it. If it doesn't work, it goes away. It's not like we're putting anything up there that's going to haunt us for the rest of our lives. Either people are going to click on it and read it, or it's going to go away. So I try to be as experimental as I could. And look, you pitched a lot of great titles for the unseen, so I was
thank
always
you.
willing to give him a shot. So yeah, it was fun.
Yep. Lawrence is one of the good ones,
Yeah.
folks. Remember that.
Did you just say was one of the good ones? Because that's just too bleak.
Well,
Now it's time for the
is.
beam to
Still-
take it back to my home planet.
Anyway,
Like
you
Poochie.
can, yeah, exactly. You can follow him on his deactivated, desolate Twitter
I think
account.
the last time that I updated it was when after I saw Sinister, and I tweeted that I liked Sinister.
I can't end the show without saying this because now you brought that up. I couldn't. The most
Oh, yeah.
for me, the best news of the whole year, honestly, because I spent so much of my time championing Kieran's film, The Citadel, when it came out, because I just really enjoyed it. Hearing that he got Sinister too, when I didn't even know that was a possibility, I just thought Sinister was Scott's thing.
Yeah,
So when I just
yeah.
read this article saying Kieran Foy to direct Sinister 2, my mind was blown. I think he's a brilliant choice.
Yeah.
And it gets me totally. And I think it's cool to get people who are gonna, who they need that shot directing sequels. Like, get that person who, man, it's that or Back to Ireland. Sorry, Kieran, go back to your corner in Ireland. I think that's really important to get the best for a sequel. And I think Friday 13th, equally amazing news, if Bruckner, somebody we haven't had on the show,
David
who
Bruckner.
wrote Dave, that's to me a genius idea because it's like, what's there to lose? It's another Jason movie. Like, let's give it to someone who needs it, has never had that biggest stage, and has shown something really creative in the one time they did found footage. I mean, it's the one standout film of VHS. I think that's just genius news.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
it's
hopeful for
ballsy.
both.
It's ballsy.
Hopefully.
They should be
Both.
taking risks like that. For
They
these
should.
types of movies.
Yeah, and there's a lot of filmmakers making indie stuff that you can take risks on. If you had some of these bigger remakes, like, just try it and see what happens.
Look at Godzilla. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's the
I think
perfect choice
definitely
for
is.
Godzilla, and I think it looks like it's going to be.
It's going to pay off.
Yeah, it does. I mean, Monsters was great, and I feel like it's
And then there's really crazy choices. Like, obviously, Raimi went really he had to put a lot of trust into Fede doing that
Evil Dead.
based on only a short. I wouldn't have made maybe that leap, but I actually was one of the few who had fun with it. So
I liked it.
I did too.
Do you know you have made it through this entire show without saying
Possession.
possession? There we
There
go.
you go.
Society,
There's a shot.
I was
the
wondering.
stuff.
Possession,
I'm gonna
possession,
get it out of
possession.
my. There you
By
go.
the way, Elric, happy birthday.
Oh yeah, it was a couple days ago.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side now.
Yeah.
I'm older.
The other
Other
side
side
of what?
of.
I just- I was.
I know, because we're the same age.
Yeah, I'm
Wait,
older
I
than
think
you.
you're a little older.
Yeah, I'm older than you.
Yeah.
But I'm older than all of you except you because I have 2 children. That ages you like an extra 10 years instantly.
Immediately.
2 children. Wow.
You have 2 children or 1?
One.
Yeah, I'm older
He's
than
cute.
you.
He
you're
wears
the
a bow tie.
Elric's the oldest then.
I'm the oldest
by kids.
by far. Yeah. Might get rid of one. But did I say that on air? Damn.
We'll see what happens in Texas.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thanks for listening. Give us your Italian horror recommendations on our Facebook page. Let us know
Yes.
what's some cool stuff if we didn't mention it.
We've been getting some cool recommendations on there. You guys should read our messages occasionally.
I do.
Oh, you do?
I
Okay.
do. We chime in there.
We chime in. Yeah, and one day, if there's somebody out there who's really studious and wants to go through all our old episodes and write down all the titles we've ever mentioned, we could
Don't.
make an amazing Tumblr
I was
with
thinking
each
a
episode
book.
and all the titles
Good
and
luck.
pictures.
Good luck. whoever
So if
does
you're
that.
out there, dream lover, please write to us.
Oh, dream.
And if
Wait,
you
that's
have, how many
Dreamweaver.
episodes are we on? 50.
This was 56.
So if you have 56 times 3 hours.
Your age.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
need that.
And a lot of time to download pictures.
Yeah, exactly.
Flavia the Heretic. Make sure it's in there.
We'll see you next week with Richard Bates Jr., the director of Excision.
Excision.
One of my personal favorites.
Yes,
Should be fun.
we'll have to have beer and bloody tampons.
And bloody
Goodbye, people.
tampons.